I made mom watch her golden son vomit over the toxic trash she fed my sister and me for 18 years, then gave her a special invoice for food poisoning. My mother provided me and my sister expired food my whole life while my bigger brother David got fresh food. Started at 7 and my sister Emily was 5. Mom's favorite was 2-year-old David. He played football, looked like dad before dad left, and got straight A's without trying. Saturdays were mom's grocery day. Bring home bags of fresh meat, veggies, bread, and milk for the main kitchen. Emily and I got our own bag. Moldy bread, dense in cans, and milk 1 day old. The yogurt was expired. She put our food in the basement fridge and told us. The upstairs kitchen fed David. Food came from the basement. She'd yell at us for taking David's meals if we took anything from upstairs. Expiring lunch meat gave me food illness at 8, 3-day bout of vomiting. Mom felt I was overdramatic. Emily was sick at 7:30 from poor milk. Mom stated she probably got sick during school. Mom explained that we were finicky eaters who only preferred aged cheese and fermented items when teachers wondered why our lunches smelled weird. David brought guests home and mom cooked steak dinners while Emily and I ate outdated soup in the basement. She told everyone we required special food for sensitive stomachs. But mom didn't expect this. Frequently getting sick boosted my immune system. I never missed school by high school. Perfect attendance earned me scholarships. To make outdated products taste good, I learned to cook everything from scratch. Obsessed with food safety, nutrition, and preservation. Full ride culinary school entry. Emily became a pediatric nutrition nurse. She wanted no child to experience what we experienced. David peaked in high school, failed college, returned home at 22, and never left. He's 40 and lives with mom, working part-time at a hardware shop. At 30, I was 4-star restaurant head chef. Got my own place at 34. Try location times review. Emily runs a hospital-wide pediatric nutrition program. Mom was cut off when we turned 18. I haven't visited that house in 18 years. Mom never phoned or apologized. Last week, she visited my restaurant. No food, no congratulations. She needs cash. David can no longer support her. The house needs work. Her social security is inadequate. She wants Emily and me to buy a retirement house. A good one. She chose it in advance. Monthly dollar math BBS $500. She thinks Emily and I can divide it since we're successful. I reared you, she says. I housed you. You were fed daily. You should now look after me. I laughed in my restaurant. Fed us? She treated David like king while feeding us crap. Jake, the sous chef, looked worried. I dismissed him, told mom I needed to check the kitchen. Instead, I called Emily, called her to meet me at mom's place tomorrow with her hubby. So I called my lawyer pal Brad. Asked him to compose something special. Emily, Ryan, Brad, and I visited mom the next day. David answered the door in his bathrobe at $2, Mathram P.M. House smelled mildewy. Mom was discussing retirement home payment schedules in the living room. Brad prepared the document I gave her. She asked, "What's this?" An invoice. I add, for all the medical bills from food poisoning, therapy for the eating disorders Emily developed, dental work from malnutrition. Comes to $math BBS $92, $0. Pay that and we'll talk about your retirement. She turned white, ranting about ungrateful kids and her sacrifices. Cut her off, Emily. You fed us expired food for 18 years while David ate like a king. You know what I found when I was 14? Your grocery receipts? You were buying our expired food on purpose from a discount salvage store. Saving on daughter food so David could buy name brand everything. David appeared confused. What expired food? Mom never told him. He believed we had special dietary needs for years. I showed him photos from my phone. Remember when you had friends over for your 16th birthday? Steak dinner upstairs. Emily and I ate expired canned ravioli in the basement. Mom told you we were at a sleepover. We were in the basement the whole time. David's face changed from confusion to horror. He regarded Mom. You fed them expired food? Mom's face went white. Red and white. She reached for David's arm, but he retreated sharply, nearly falling. He stared at her like a stranger, which I'd never seen before. First, she opened her mouth but said nothing. Then the words tumbled together fast and desperate. She was just trying to be practical, she said, making tough decisions as a single mother with 3 kids and no help. The food was perfectly safe, she said. Just past some random date printed on a label that didn't mean anything. We were always so picky anyway, turning our noses up at everything, so what was the point of wasting good money on food we'd complain about? David stared at her, mouth slightly open, eyes widening. Emily slashed the room with her voice. Never before had my sister sounded so cold, sharp, and done with everything. She swiped through photos on her phone. The screen was held to David's face. Moldy bread with green and white fuzz on the crust. Overstuffed cans bulged. Milk with chunks in yellow liquid. Yogurt with dark, wet topping. David inspected each photo. His face paler with each swipe. Mom repeated, louder, that the photographs were phony, overblown, or out of context. Emily kept swiping, exposing him more of our 18-year diet. David bolted for the bathroom. He vomited, resounding through the calm home. Mom yelled after him that we were dramatic, manipulating him, and turning her kid against her with lies and fabricated stories. As Brad shifted alongside me, I sensed his lawyer instincts, likely recording what Mom said for later reference. My voice was calm, but my hands were shaking. We have documentation of everything, I told Mom. Medical records from all the times I got food poisoning that you dismissed as me being dramatic. Hospital visits for Emily's stomach issues. Dental records showing the damage from malnutrition. Brad noted that teachers saw our lunches and remembered Mom's remarks regarding our particular dietary needs. Mom's face turned nasty, slipping her tight mask. David returned from the bathroom looking faint. He was breathing hard and had gray skin. He went straight to Mom and asked whether it was real. Did you really buy our food from a salvage store on purpose? Mom didn't reply. She stood there with her mouth drawn into a narrow line, her eyes flitting between David and the door like she was planning an escape. David slumped on the couch with his head in his hands. Ryan talked for the first time since arriving. He calmly stated that he has seen child mistreatment as a pediatrician. This was intentional abuse. Favoritism and purposeful injury were shown by denying one infant appropriate nutrition while feeding another. Mom turned to face him, shrieking. He was an outsider. She remarked. He had no right to judge her parenting choices. He didn't know what it was like to raise 3 kids alone with barely any money. Ryan stood with his hand on Emily's shoulder without responding. Emily stood and proclaimed our departure. Mom shouldn't demand money from us for her retirement home or anything else. Mom's face suddenly went from angry to scared. She talked about being homeless, having nowhere to go, and how we couldn't abandon her. David instantly inquired about her savings. He spoke quietly, but it pierced Mom's terror like paper. How much did she save by feeding us old food instead of fresh as she bought for him? The question lingered. Mom couldn't reply. Her mouth opened and closed but said nothing. Mom screamed as we approached the door. She shouted after her sacrifices for us, unappreciative daughters. We neglected her in need. We abandoned her to die. We left one by one once Brad opened the door. David didn't follow. Through the window, I saw him sitting on that couch, head in hands, shoulders shaking. Mom's voice crept closer to our automobiles as we left that house, growing more urgent. After getting in our autos, Emily collapsed into Ryan in the passenger seat. Sobs from her chest shook her whole body. Ryan hugged her and held on while she cried on his shoulder. I watched them through their windshield from my car door and felt nothing, like my body was in the parking lot but my mind was elsewhere. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I took it out without thinking. Jake texted asking if I was okay and if he should cook dinner alone. Something about seeing his name on screen brought everything back. The phone almost fell out of my shaky hands. I texted that I needed an hour and will arrive soon. Brad approached and grabbed my shoulder. He promised Mom a cease and desist letter and warned that any further communication would result in a restraining order. He then proposed reporting the childhood abuse to Adult Protective Services, not for prosecution since too much time had elapsed, but to provide an official record in case Mom did anything further. Before he saw my face, I nodded and went in my car. I passed their car with Emily still crying. I worked for 2 days, trying not to think about Mom's face or David on the couch. Jake returned to my office looking uneasy before dinner on Tuesday. At the front, David asked to talk. After telling Jake to manage the kitchen, I found David standing at the host stand, looking exhausted. He had red eyes and slept in clothes, and something in his expression prompted me to take him back to my office instead of instructing him to leave. He sat across from my desk in a chair with a folder. He was reviewing Mom's finances. She found 2 zero-year-old salvage store receipts for our food. To show me, he opened the folder and spread them. Rows of receipts for expired meat, dented cans, and old dairy. Her savings exceeded Math BB, S33, $0. They were compared to other receipts to determine where the money went. Sports gear, college tries, automobile. Every dollar Mom saved by feeding us garbage improved his life. David started crying in my office. It was full-on crying that made his shoulders shake. His excuse was that he never knew and would have done something. Seeing him come apart, I wasn't sure I believed him. Mom always picked him, and he enjoyed it. He enjoyed being special and getting fresh meals, new items, and Mom's attention. But his terror looked real, like he was seeing his upbringing from a different perspective and realized he was standing on our pain the whole time. I saw him as another mom-manipulated victim. She exploited him against us without his knowledge. David requested something from me. My voice was tired and flat. He glanced up from his hands and stated he only wanted to know why Mom hurt us, telling him the truth. She hated having daughters. After Dad left, she saw Emily and me as burdens and David as his continuance. She never wanted 2 more mouths to feed. She glimpsed the life she could have had with 1 child every time she looked at us. If possible, David's face paled more. He inquired if this could be fixed. I told him I didn't know. Childhood was lost. No apology or money could erase those years of hunger, sickness, and fear in that cellar. No amount of sorry could erase the food poisoning, stomach aches, or shame of bringing expired food to school. He nodded as if expecting that answer, yet it hurt. David informed me of his departure from Mom's home. He has applied to 3 flats since starting his search. He stopped financially supporting Mom. His part-time job barely covered the utilities, and now he understood where he spent his childhood. Every football cleat and Letterman blazer was bought with our suffering savings. He couldn't tolerate it anymore. He was credible about that. I sat in my office staring at those receipts on my desk after David departed. I called Emily to report the conversation. After a long silence, she spoke. Her voice was hard when she spoke. She reminded me that David had 40 years to discover something was wrong but didn't. He never queried why we got sick in the basement while he ate fresh meals above. After he opened his eyes, she wasn't ready to forgive him. I told her I understood and wasn't requesting forgiveness. I wanted her to know what occurred. Mom called my restaurant nonstop the following week. Jake gave me a stack of message slips with her increasingly desperate voicemails. I was begged to reconsider helping her with the retirement home. Others threatened to call us bad daughters for abandoning our mother. Some said she sacrificed everything for us, and this was our reward. Jake started filtering my calls without my request. If Mom called, he'd say I wasn't available and hang up. I appreciated his protection, but I hated that my staff was watching this family drama. Line cooks gave me sympathetic smiles, and servers muttered in corners when they thought I couldn't hear. Everyone knew the boss and her family were troubled. Brad notified Adult Protective Services on Thursday afternoon. I only discovered it the following Tuesday when my phone rang during prep work and the caller ID displayed a strange number. Something made me answer instead of leaving it on voicemail. Caller John Carter from Adult Protective Services introduced himself. He spoke in a calm, professional manner that made tough things easier to discuss. Brad reported Mom's abuse of me and Emily. He said, they wanted to talk to me about Mom's current condition and David's when he was there, even though they couldn't prosecute decades-old child abuse. I offered to meet him at my restaurant after lunch the next day. The man agreed and arrived at 3 with an old leather briefcase and a worn but neat and pressed suit. I set out my desk contents in my office as we sat. Medical records from my food poisoning episodes. Each noted my symptoms and Mom's explanations that the doctors had documented with growing concern. David found salvage store receipts from years of buying outdated and broken food. I took photos of the basement fridge on one of my last visits home before cutting Mom off to capture everything in case I needed proof. John slowly read each document, remaining professional. But I saw disgust in his eyes. He took notes in a little notebook, asking me about dates, specifics, and Mom's caregivers and support system. I informed him about David leaving, Mom's refusal of subsidized housing, and her claim that Emily and I owed her an expensive retirement home. After reviewing everything, John closed his notebook and glanced at me. He said David had approached them regarding Mom's mental and financial state. Mom had deteriorated since our confrontation. Her rage self-pity cycle. She called David at all hours, yelling about ungrateful children and wailing about dying alone. David documented everything, kept call and message logs, and turned it over to Adult Protective Services because he was worried about Mom's mental health. John told me they would visit Mom's home to check her living conditions and mental health, but their major focus was getting her the right services. He couldn't force her to accept help, but they could inform her of her options. I thanked him for taking the situation seriously, and he shook my hand before leaving, promising to contact me following their assessment. 3 days later, my phone rang at home while I reviewed supplier invoices. The screen displayed David's name, and I hesitated to respond. I picked him up and his voice seemed lighter, like a weight had been removed. He informed me he discovered a modest studio on the 3rd floor of an old downtown building. Rent was low because the house was modest and the neighborhood was bad. It was smaller than his bedroom at Mom's house, but he felt free. He could walk to work from there, and the landlord had let him move in with just first month's rent since David had been working at the same hardware shop for 10 years and had good references. He had been there a week and was still getting used to shopping and cooking for himself. He then described his family trauma therapist, Malene Wagner. She explained to him how Mom had deceived him by making him the golden child and establishing a distinct reality for Emily and me, keeping him blind for so long. David found it hard to realize how much he'd missed and how many indicators he'd disregarded since he preferred to believe Mom's falsehoods than ask why his sisters were always sick and eating different cuisine. Listening without letting him speak. After he finished, I said I was delighted he got help. The talk ended awkwardly. We weren't sure how to span 40 years of childhoods. So we talked. Mom probably acquired my mobile number from David before he left or an old contact list. A SMS message woke me up at 11 p.m. The long, multi-text message said she would be homeless and my fault if she died alone on the street. She wrote she gave up all for us. How Mom labored hard to keep us above ground. We were really rude to leave her when she needed us. Text continued, each more frantic and manipulative. Brad answered within minutes to every communication I screenshotted. Even if it was late. He ordered me to ban her number and included everything in the harassment report. I did, and the silence was soothing. Emily called the next morning to suggest a neutral lunch. Not at my restaurant where personnel could listen or at her residence where Ryan could feel forced to mediate. We chose a tiny Italian restaurant between her hospital and mine. A place that was usually busy enough to ignore others' talks. On arrival, she looked exhausted, under-eye dark circles that makeup couldn't disguise. We ordered salads we didn't like. She said the downstairs fridge gave her nightmares. She'd wake up at night tasting outdated milk, feeling 7 years old again, and afraid to ask for fresh food since Mom would scold at her for being ungrateful. After our fight with Mom, the dreams began. She felt that finally telling the truth had revealed something she'd hidden for years. Ryan helped, but he didn't understand. Didn't comprehend growing up thinking you were worth less than fresh food. She listened silently as I described my conversation with David. Unreadable face. I finished, and she claimed she wasn't ready to forgive him. A few weeks of therapy and guilt couldn't erase 40 years of deliberate ignorance. Even though I thought David deserved a chance to make things right, I understood her point. And didn't dispute. We chatted about therapy while eating salads. Emily said we needed it individually to process what we were finally letting ourselves to feel about our childhood. She had researched therapists and found Gregory Podats, who treated adult survivors of childhood abuse. His office was near the hospital and offered evening appointments. I should make an appointment like she did next week. I agreed and grabbed my phone to call his office and schedule my first session. I told the receptionist I needed to talk about childhood trauma and she was kind and didn't ask questions. She scheduled me for Thursday night at 7 after my restaurant's dinner prep but before service. I received a text from David 3 days later. He wanted Emily and me to meet. To comprehend Mom's actions, his therapist decided he should hear from us how the abuse affected us. Emily first refused to help David feel better about his guilt when I phoned her immediately. But I urged her to give him one meeting to hear our message without defending himself or making excuses. She finally agreed to meet somewhere public and neutral and leave any time without explanation. I texted David back and suggested a downtown coffee shop full of laptop-using individuals having comm chats. We scheduled it for 2 Saturday afternoon. Emily and I found David at a corner table with 3 coffees waiting. He looked dreadful, like he'd aged 5 years in 2 weeks. His face looked pallid and drawn. He had red eyes from weeping or not sleeping. Seeing us, he stood up but didn't hug or shake hands, just pointed to the chairs and sat. Emily, the farthest from him, was defensive and walled off. Sitting between them, I curled my hands around the coffee cup he bought me, feeling the warmth. David didn't apologize or explain. He merely stared at us and asked us to describe growing up in that house to help him comprehend what he'd missed all those years. Emily began, her voice firm but her hands shaking around her coffee cup. She mentioned the stomach aches that grew so common she stopped talking about them. Her school discomfort when other kids asked why her lunch smelled terrible and she had to lie about preferring old cheese. Feeling inferior to the fresh food in the upper kitchen, like she and I were flawed or undeserving. She mentioned a high school eating disorder. Even after getting fresh food, she continuously checked expiration dates and threw away everything that seemed odd. I told David about laying on the bathroom floor for 3 days at 8 years old. The outdated lunch meat made me throw up every hour as the chilly tile rubbed against my cheek. Mom stepped at the doorway and told me I was dramatic, that I probably got a stomach illness at school. I couldn't move without stomach pain. Emily brought me water in a plastic cup and sat with me when Mom wasn't looking. After that, I smelled everything before eating. Every food item was scented and evaluated for spoilage. I'd hold bread up to the light to see whether mom missed mold spots when she cut them. Because I realized those dates meant nothing in our family, I'd smell milk even if it was good. Meal worry persisted. Even at my restaurant with the freshest ingredients, I sometimes check expiration dates 3 times. Some evenings I taste ruined food that's not there. My therapist says my brain is still protecting that fearful girl who never knew if her next meal would make her sick based on trauma. I spoke while David sat still, tears streaming down his cheeks and chin onto his shirt. He didn't erase or hide them. After Emily and I stopped chatting, he shakily breathed and his voice was raw. He apologized, saying he had no knowledge and would have done something if he had known. Though sincere, I wasn't sure I believed them. He threatened to confront mom and demand she apologize for what she did to us. He needed to hear it from her own mouth. Needed her to admit the reality instead of hiding behind excuses and reasons. Emily's response was fast and sharp. She warned him that mom would never admit fault, that she'd spent too many years defending her acts to herself to suddenly grow a conscience now. Mom had developed an entire story in her brain about being a struggling single mother who tried her best with limited means. She'd convinced herself that feeding us outdated food was practical and wise, not abusive. Emily informed David he was setting himself up for disappointment if he expected any type of serious apology or accountability. But David shook his head and said he needed to try anyhow for his own closure, if nothing else. He couldn't move forward without at least attempting to learn the truth from mom directly. 2 weeks passed before David called us again. He sent a text message claiming the confrontation with mom had gone just as Emily expected. Mom disputed everything, claiming we were exaggerating and misremembering our upbringing. She diverted responsibility onto dad for leaving, onto us for being expensive to raise, onto the world for not giving her enough money to raise 3 kids alone. She argued the expired food was alright, that expiration dates were simply suggestions, that we turned out healthy, so obviously it wasn't that bad. David stated she got angry when he pushed back, accused him of abandoning her by accepting our falsehoods. She told him he was an ungrateful son after everything she'd given for him. The conversation concluded with her yelling at him to get out of her house if he was going to side with his sisters against his own mother. But something shifted in David during that confrontation. He contacted me a few days later and his voice seemed better, clearer somehow. He informed me he finally saw mom clearly for the first time in his life. He observed the selfishness and cruelty that Emily and I grew up with every single day. He knew now why we couldn't have a relationship with her. Why we'd cut her off altogether the day we turned 18. He claimed witnessing her deny and deflect and blame everyone else opened his eyes to how she'd manipulated him his entire life. He'd been her favorite because he served her once, made her seem good, given her something to brag about. The moment he questioned her or challenged her version of events, she turned on him just like she'd always turned on us. Mom's landlord phoned David 3 weeks after our coffee shop meeting. Mom had named him as her emergency contact on the rental application years ago. The landlord said that the house needed extensive repairs that mom couldn't afford. The roof was leaking in 2 locations. The furnace was on its last legs, and the electrical system was obsolete and potentially unsafe. The landlord had given mom 30 days to either make the repairs or move out. David told the landlord he was no longer involved in mom's finances and suggested contacting social services for aid with elderly housing. The landlord seemed frustrated but said he'd check into it. David texted me shortly after the call questioning if he'd done the right thing. I told him yes, that mom's housing situation wasn't his responsibility anymore. John called my cell phone on a Tuesday afternoon when I was prepping vegetables for dinner service. He stated they'd completed their inquiry into mom's living circumstances. While they couldn't compel her into any particular housing arrangement, they'd provided her with resources for low-income senior living. Mom qualified for a subsidized apartment that would cost Math BBS $300 a month based on her Social Security income. The apartment was clean, safe, and in a building with other seniors. It had a small kitchen, a bedroom, and a bathroom. Everything she genuinely needed. John stated he'd personally taken mom through the application process and helped her comprehend the benefits. He appeared optimistic that she'd accept the help. Mom refused the subsidized housing immediately. She called John again the following day and told him she deserved better than some small apartment in a building full of old people. She still thought she earned the Math BBS $7,500 retirement home she'd picked out. The one with the elegant dining room and the activities coordinator and the landscaped grounds. She informed John that her daughters were required to pay for it, that we owed her after everything she'd done for us. John called me back sounding tired and furious. He indicated there was nothing more they could do if she wouldn't accept adequate help. They'd given her options within her limits, and she'd rejected them. Unless she became a danger to herself or others, they couldn't force her into accommodation she didn't want. My therapy sessions with Gregory were helping me grasp Mom's inability to take responsibility. We'd been meeting every Thursday evening for 6 weeks now. Gregory explained that Mom's denial wasn't really about me or Emily at all. It was about her own inability to face what kind of mother she'd been. Admitting she deliberately fed her daughters expired food while giving her son fresh meals would require her to see herself as abusive and cruel. Her entire self-image was built on being a struggling single mother who did her best under difficult circumstances. Accepting the truth would shatter that image and force her to confront decades of choices she couldn't take back. Gregory said some people would rather die defending their false narrative than face the truth about themselves. That wasn't something Emily and I could fix or change, no matter how much evidence we presented. David started showing up at my restaurant every Thursday evening around 7. He'd sit at the bar and order whatever Jake recommended, then chat with him about food and cooking techniques. Jake seemed to enjoy the company and would explain how he prepared different dishes, what ingredients worked well together, why certain cooking methods produced better results. David told me one night that he was learning to cook properly for the first time in his life. Mom had never taught him anything about cooking because she'd always just made his meals for him. He'd been completely dependent on her for food his entire life, never learning basic skills that most people picked up as teenagers. Now he was watching cooking videos online, practicing simple recipes in his tiny studio apartment kitchen, slowly building the skills he should have learned 20 years ago. A woman named Laura sent me a message through Instagram 3 weeks after David started his weekly restaurant visits. She introduced herself as someone David had been seeing for a few months and asked if we could meet to talk about the family situation. David had told her everything, she wrote, and she wanted to understand the dynamics better before getting more serious with him. I showed the message to Jake during prep time and he raised his eyebrows but didn't say anything. I agreed to meet Laura at a wine bar downtown on my next night off. Laura was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 glasses of red wine waiting. She stood up to shake my hand and I noticed she was tall, maybe 5'10", with short dark hair and direct brown eyes that looked right at me without any of that fake sympathy some people give when they hear about abuse. She thanked me for coming and got straight to the point, asking specific questions about what our childhood was actually like and what role David played in it. I appreciated that she didn't dance around the topic or try to make small talk first. She listened while I explained the basement fridge, the expired food, the constant sickness, and David eating fresh meals upstairs while we got garbage. Laura nodded and took notes on her phone, which seemed weird until she explained she was a social worker and documenting helped her process difficult information. She told me she'd been encouraging David to maintain distance from Mom while trying to build relationships with Emily and me if we were open to it. She said David talked about us constantly, about the guilt eating him alive, about wanting to make things right somehow, even though he knew he couldn't change the past. Laura leaned forward and lowered her voice like she was sharing something private. David had been having panic attacks, she said, waking up in the middle of the night thinking about all the ways he benefited from our suffering. The sports equipment Mom bought him, the college tuition she paid before he dropped out, the car she helped him get, all of it came from money she saved by feeding us expired food from the salvage store. He'd been adding it up obsessively, John told me, trying to calculate exactly how much of his life was built on our pain. I stirred my wine and thought about that for a minute before responding. I told Grace that while David was part of the system Mom created, he was also a kid who didn't know what was happening. Mom intended to abuse us by buying spoiled food for her daughters and feeding her son fresh food. David benefited but didn't cause it. Even though Emily and I got the same result, there's a difference. I called Emily the next day and we had coffee near her hospital. I mentioned meeting Grace and her comments on David's panic attacks and guilt. Emily stirred sugar into her coffee and stared out the window before speaking. She asked me if we were ready for David. He is family, not just a weekly visitor to my restaurant. I wasn't sure he wanted to understand and change. Trusting him after 40 years of being Mom's favorite while we ate garbage wouldn't happen in weeks. Emily confirmed that her therapist said so. Healing from this childhood takes years, not months. David must prove himself through consistent actions, not just words and guilt. We remained open but set clear boundaries and low expectations. David called me 2 months later, stressed, to tell me about Mom. When she stopped paying the mortgage, her house went into foreclosure. He warned her this would happen if she rejected John's subsidized apartment, but she didn't trust him. She reportedly felt Emily and I would give her money for her magnificent retirement home if she was desperate enough. David tried to convince Mom we weren't going to change our thoughts and had set clear boundaries. But Mom insisted we were stubborn and would change when she lost everything. Mom had about 45 days until the bank foreclosed. David asked if we could help her again, but I reminded him, Mom chose to feed us expired food for 18 years and could live with the repercussions. The bank sale happened faster than planned. Some investor acquired the house at auction for cash, giving Mom 30 days to leave instead of 45. David helped her move to the subsidized senior apartment since he couldn't abandon her after everything. He assured me he was setting limits. He wouldn't give her money, allow her, guilt him into more assistance than he could afford, or be her emotional dumping ground. The little but neat apartment was in a senior housing near a bus route. David claimed Mom moaned the whole time they moved her belongings about how her children had put her in poverty and how she deserved more after raising us. Instead of fighting her, David moved boxes and assembled furniture until everything was set up. Mom attempted one more manipulation a week after moving. She sobbed and told David she needed pricey therapy, her insurance wouldn't pay. She needed $math BBS 12. $0 immediately or she'd die, she said. He was her only hope after her unappreciative daughters left her. David requested her doctor's diagnosis, treatment plan, and anything else that supported her claims. Mom was furious and told him to trust her without proof. David insisted, and Mom couldn't help because she'd lied. She eventually admitted no illness. She lied to get money. David's voice was shattered when he told me over the phone. Like that final lie had destroyed his notion of Mom as a kind person who made errors. That deception altered David more than all the prior revelations. The next day, he called Mom to say he was going low contact and would check on her once a month to make sure she was fed and safe. But he needed time to heal after growing up in a manipulative and favoritistic atmosphere. David maintained calm and ended the conversation as Mom shouted desertion and ingratitude. Afterward, he texted me that it was the hardest thing he'd ever done, but the most essential, and that his therapist, Malene, had helped him understand that defending himself wasn't abandoning Mom. She was setting appropriate limits she should have honored years earlier. Emily and I had supper with David and Grace at my restaurant 3 months after our argument at Mom's old house. I reserved a rear table to avoid interruptions from other customers and workers. All of us sitting there with menus we weren't reading, talking about weather and traffic was odd at first. David tried to cook her dinner and unintentionally used salt instead of sugar in the dessert, Grace said. Something broke the tension. We laughed heartily. Not courteous, but sincere, like you can't breathe. David shared another pasta burning experience due to forgetting water. Emily said Ryan tried to make her breakfast in bed and set off the smoke alarm. We laughed and talked for 2 hours at that table, feeling like we were developing something new that wasn't defined by our background or Mom's violence but by who we were becoming now. David announced his news after dessert. He took general education classes at community college to get back into school to get his degree. He stated he studied business management to develop a career rather than work part-time for life. Grace gripped his hand under the table, revealing a real collaboration. Someone who helped him improve rather than keep him trapped. David looked at Emily and me and stated he couldn't fix the past or make up for his ignorance. While we suffered, he wanted us to know he was attempting to become a brother we might desire. Emily silently gripped his other hand across the table. The gesture convinced me to meet Gregory twice a week instead of once. He advised EMDR for my 8-year-old food poisoning. Mom said I was dramatic when I vomited for 3 days. We sat in his office with the light bar, and I watched the moving dot while remembering the bathroom floor, the taste of bile, and how my stomach cramped so much I felt it was tearing. Gregory asked me to score distress 0-10, start at 9. We conducted eye motions, and he inquired what happened. I pictured myself on that chilly tile floor, 7 years old, terrified I might die and nobody caring. Extra eye movements. The memory changed to me being successful and strong, contacting the girl to say she survived. After the session, distress dropped to 3. I left Gregory's office feeling like someone had lifted a weight I'd forgotten I was carrying. Jake said I looked lighter at the meal the next day. I told him I was going through old items, and he nodded like he knew without explanation. 2 weeks later, Emily contacted me with a joyful voice I hadn't heard since we were kids. Her hospital began screening youngsters for dietary issues and nutrition neglect. She led the design, leveraging everything we did to discover youngsters suffering like us. Ever been in a crazy situation like this? As I tell you the story, drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your take. My twin sister obsessed over my relationship, stalked my fiancé, sabotaged my college relationships, and tried to ruin my wedding by impersonating me. I, 23F, need guidance about my twin sister, Grace, 23F, and whether I made the correct decision by completely cutting her off. My family thinks I was overreacting, but I can't get over what she did. Grace and I are identical twins. Growing up, everyone often commented on how different we were, despite the fact that we looked identical. I was the quiet one who enjoyed literature and painting, whereas she was boisterous and popular. Our parents always made sure we had different identities, but Grace never seemed to be content with that. Throughout high school, Grace would mimic whatever I did. If I joined the drama club, she would join as well. If I started dating someone, she would suddenly find them interesting. When I was accepted to art school with a scholarship, she enrolled in the same program, despite having no prior interest in painting. She was accepted based on her GPA rather than her talent. At art school, I met Daniel, 25M, who was in my sculpture class, and we connected over our common passion of making things by hand. Daniel was unlike anyone I'd dated before. He remained calm, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in my job and ambitions. We started dating during our second year. Grace immediately loathed Daniel. She would comment on how uninteresting he was and how I should do better. She would interrupt our chats whenever he came over to our shared apartment. She even began flirting with him in front of me, making both Daniel and I uncomfortable. After graduation, Daniel and I relocated to Portland together. Grace remained in our hometown and took a job at a marketing agency. I could finally breathe after years. I understood how much Grace's continual presence had impacted me. I began creating art that was completely mine, without fear of her copying or condemning it. Daniel proposed to me 6 months ago on a weekend vacation to the ocean. It was perfect and private, just the two of us watching the sunset. When I contacted Grace to deliver her the news, she remained silent for a long time. Then she asked if I was sure I wanted to marry someone this young. She claimed I was rushing into things, and Daniel most likely wanted to lock me up before I discovered I could do better. I ignored her remarks and asked her to be my partner of honor anyway. She agreed, but I could tell she was unhappy about it. The trouble began immediately. Grace preferred to plan things her way. She chose a dress type she knew I disliked and claimed it would look better on both of us because we were twins. When I tried on several outfits, she threw a fuss and thought I was being difficult. She also continued to recommend alterations to the guest list, the venue, and even the cuisine. Every idea was the reverse of what Daniel and I want. When I urged her to stop, she explained that she was only trying to help make my wedding better. Grace paid us a weekend visit 3 months ago to talk about her wedding arrangements. Daniel was out of town for work, leaving only the two of us. I felt it would be good to spend time with my sister like we did as children. On Saturday night, we were discussing centerpiece alternatives when Grace abruptly stopped talking. She looked at me strangely and said she had something important to tell me. She explained that she had been thinking a lot about my engagement and decided she couldn't watch me make such a terrible mistake. She told me that Daniel was not the proper person for me, and that I was settling out of fear of being alone. I inquired what she meant, and she replied Daniel was uninteresting and lacked ambition. She pointed out that he was still working at the same woodworking shop he started directly after graduation, but others his age were climbing corporate ladders. She thought I was too talented and intelligent to be tied down to someone who would limit me. I informed her that Daniel enjoyed his work and was going to start his own furniture business soon. She laughed and claimed it confirmed her point about him lacking genuine ambition. Then she uttered something that made my blood turn cold. She informed me she had been studying Daniel online and discovered certain things that troubled her. When I asked what she meant, she explained that she had seen him eating lunch with a woman from his workplace several times. I immediately recognized who she was talking about. Anna was Daniel's co-worker and friend. She was married with 2 children, and Daniel had mentioned having lunch with her and other co-workers several times. I told Grace this, but she shook her head, saying it appeared to be more than friendship to her. Grace took out her phone and showed me images she had shot of Daniel and Anna in a restaurant. They were plainly enjoying a typical lunch chat, but Grace zoomed in and cropped the photographs to make it appear more intimate than it actually was. I looked at the images and realized Grace had drove 3 hours to Portland to spy on my fiancé. She had followed him around and took photographs without his knowledge. The level of forethought and duplicity was staggering. When I asked her why she would do this, she broke down in tears. She claimed she loved me too much to let me wreck my life. She persuaded me to call off the engagement, saying we could return home together and start over. That was then I realized what this was all about. Grace wasn't bothered with my happiness. She was angry that I had a life without her. She couldn't bear the fact that Daniel and I were creating something together that didn't include her. I told her she had to leave immediately. She began crying more, saying I had chosen a man over my own sister. She claimed that we were supposed to stay together forever and that I was breaking up our family. I packed her bags as she sobbed on my couch. When I handed them to her, she grabbed my arm and declared that she would not be my maid of honor if I continued to behave like this. I told her it was fine because she was no longer invited to the wedding at all. She left that night, and I haven't spoken with her since. I blocked her phone number and social media accounts. The next day, I received calls from my parents, aunts, and several cousins. Grace had called everyone and informed them that I had kicked her out for attempting to help me. She claimed I accused her of lying and chose Daniel over family. My mother called me crying, saying she couldn't believe I would treat Grace like this. She claimed Grace was only looking out for me, and that cutting her off was excessive. My dad was quieter, but he agreed that I should try to work things out with Grace. My extended family has taken sides. Some think I overreacted, while others understand why I was upset, but the majority believe I should forgive Grace because she is my twin and we have always been close. Daniel has been supportive, but I can tell he is stressed about the situation. He offered to talk to Grace himself, but I refused. I don't want her anywhere near him or our relationship. The wedding is in 2 months, and I keep receiving texts from family members asking if Grace will attend. When I say no, they look at me as if I'm the villain in the story. I have started doubting myself. Maybe Grace was genuinely trying to help in her own misguided way. Perhaps I was too harsh by cutting her off entirely. But every time I think about those photos and the preparation that went into taking them, I get angry all over again. Am I wrong to end my relationship with my twin sister over this? Should I try to reconcile prior to the wedding? Update 1. I had not expected my post to receive so much attention, so thank you to everyone who commented. The majority of you confirmed what I already knew deep down, which helped me remain strong when things got worse. A lot has happened since I last posted. My mother called 2 weeks ago and asked if she could come visit to talk about Grace. I agreed because I thought she'd come to understand my point of view. When she arrived, she had Grace with her. They planned this ambush together, hoping to force me to reconcile. I opened my door and saw both of them standing there with luggage, and I almost shut it. My mother quickly explained that they just wanted to talk and that Grace had something important to tell me. Grace started crying before she even stepped inside. I let them in but told them they couldn't stay in my house. They could find a hotel if they planned to stay for more than a few hours. Grace immediately apologized. She admitted she had overstepped and apologized for following Daniel around. She claimed she was afraid of losing me and acted out of panic. But then she said something that made me realize she still had no idea what she had done wrong. She expressed her hope that I could forgive her mistakes so that we could move forward and plan the wedding together. I asked her what mistake she was referring to. She admitted taking the photos was wrong, but she maintained her concerns about Daniel. She stated that she still believed I was rushing into marriage and that Daniel was not ambitious enough for me. My mother nodded, saying Grace had valid points about Daniel. She explained that they both wanted what was best for me. I asked my mother if she'd seen the photos Grace took. She said yes, and that while Grace should not have followed Daniel, the photos did raise some concerns about his relationship with another woman. I couldn't believe what I heard. I took out my phone and called Daniel, putting him on speaker. I asked him to tell my mother and Grace about Anna. Daniel explained that Anna was a friend and co-worker who had helped him plan a surprise for me. They had been meeting to finalize details for a custom jewelry box he was creating for our anniversary. He explained that he had been careful not to mention it around me because he wanted it to be a surprise. Then Daniel said something that made my stomach sink. He inquired whether this was about the private investigator because Anna had mentioned that someone had been questioning both of them at work. Grace's face turned white. When I asked her what Daniel was talking about, she began crying again. It turned out Grace had done more than just take photos. She'd hired someone to investigate Daniel and had been looking for dirt on him for months. The investigator had contacted Daniel's coworkers, including Anna, and inquired about his behavior and relationships. Anna had told her husband about it, and they were both concerned that someone was stalking them. I looked at Grace and asked how far she had traveled. She admitted to conducting background checks on Daniel and even calling his ex-girlfriend from college to inquire about their relationship. My mother attempted to defend Grace by claiming she was simply being thorough because she cared about me. She said it was wise to know who you were marrying. I told both of them to leave immediately. Grace began pleading, saying she would stop investigating Daniel if I would just listen to her concerns. My mother told me I was being unreasonable, and Grace had spent a lot of money to protect me. I said I didn't care how much money Grace had spent on her obsession. I informed them that they had 1 hour to pack and leave or I would call the police. After they left, Daniel arrived home early from work. He was shaken by the phone call and wanted to make sure I was all right. We talked for hours about what Grace had done. Daniel informed me that the investigator had contacted his boss and several clients, inquiring about his work quality and personal life. His boss had pulled him aside to see if he was in any legal trouble. Daniel had been perplexed and embarrassed, but had not connected it to Grace until now. We also called Anna and her husband to apologize and explain what had occurred. They were relieved to finally understand why someone had inquired about them, but they were also disappointed that they had been drawn into family drama. The next day, my father called me. He said my mother had told him everything, and he wanted to hear my side of the story. My father remained quiet for a long time after I explained about the private investigator and the harassment of Daniel's co-workers. Finally, he denied knowing anything about it. He claimed my mother and Grace told him I was overreacting to some photos, not that Grace hired someone to stalk my fiancé. My father apologized for not supporting me earlier. He said he would talk to my mother about Grace's behavior and try to explain why I was upset, but the damage had already been done. Our extended family had learned about the private investigator, and everyone was now taking sides. Some relatives believe Grace went too far, while others believe she was simply trying to protect her sister. My mother has been calling me every day, alternating between anger and guilt. She claims I'm tearing the family apart and that Grace is heartbroken. She keeps asking me to let Grace attend the wedding as a regular guest. I've not changed my mind. Grace has not been invited, and anyone who brings her as $, plus $1 will be asked to leave. Daniel and I decided to hire security for the wedding after his boss informed us that the investigator had inquired about our wedding date and location. We're worried Grace will try to show up anyway. The worst part is that this entire situation has ruined what should have been a happy time in our lives. Instead of discussing our future together, we are dealing with Grace's obsession and my family's dysfunction. I keep wondering if I could have handled this differently. But every time I think about Grace hiring a private investigator, I realize I made the right decision. Update 2. The wedding happened 3 weeks ago, and I need to tell you what happened because it was worse than I expected. Security was definitely the right decision. Grace attempted to show up, not as a guest, but as someone claiming to be me. She had apparently planned this for several weeks. Grace arrived at the wedding venue wearing a white dress that was identical to mine. She had gotten a copy of my dress design, most likely through my mother. She informed the security guard that she was the bride and that there had been a mix-up with the guest list. Luckily, the security team was ready. They asked for her ID and immediately called me. I was getting ready in the bridal suite when they informed me that someone claiming to be Grace was trying to enter. I looked out the window and noticed her arguing with security. She had done her hair and makeup just like mine. From a distance, we appeared identical. It felt like seeing a twisted version of myself. Grace was escorted off the property by security, but she did not leave quietly. She stood in the parking lot, screaming that I was making a huge mistake and that Daniel would cheat on me. Several guests arrived early and heard everything. My mother was already inside the venue, helping with last-minute preparations. When security told her what had happened, she dashed outside to speak with Grace. They had a loud argument in the parking lot, which half of the wedding party witnessed. My mother came back inside, crying, and begged me to let Grace stay for the ceremony. She claimed Grace was devastated and only wanted to see me get married. I told her no and that if she kept pushing, she could also leave. Despite all of this, the ceremony was beautiful. Daniel and I were able to focus on each other and forget about the drama outside, but I noticed some guests looking around nervously, probably wondering if Grace would return. The situation deteriorated during the reception. Grace had apparently been watching from across the street. When she noticed guests leaving for bathroom breaks or to smoke, she approached a few. My cousin James approached me during dinner and said Grace had stopped him outside. She had informed him that Daniel was already cheating, and she had proof. She showed him printouts of text messages allegedly exchanged between Daniel and other women. According to James, the messages appeared to be fake, as if someone had created fake conversations with screenshots. The phone numbers did not correspond to any of Daniel's devices, and some of the messages mentioned things that made no sense. But Grace did not stop there. She had made fake social media profiles with photos of women from Daniel's workplace and was sending herself messages pretending to be them. She then took screenshots of these fictitious conversations as evidence. When James explained this to me, I realized Grace had completely lost touch with reality. She had expanded her investigation beyond Daniel. She was actively fabricating evidence to support her point. Daniel and I decided to contact the police. Grace was harassing, and the fabricated evidence could be considered fraud. We wanted to document everything in case the situation escalated further. The police took our statement and said they would speak with Grace. They explained that showing up to a wedding in a wedding gown could be considered impersonation, and creating fake evidence was certainly illegal. 2 hours later, my phone started ringing with calls from family members. Grace had been arrested. She was charged with harassment and falsifying documents. My mother was at the police station, trying to bail her out. I should have stayed at my own wedding reception, but I felt compelled to go to the station and confront this head-on. Daniel accompanied me, and we met my parents there. My mother laughed so hard, she kept blaming me for not forgiving Grace earlier. She stated that if I had simply included Grace in the wedding, none of this would have occurred. My father looked exhausted. He pulled me aside and told me that he had no idea about the fake messages until the police explained what Grace had done. He claimed Grace had lied to both my parents about the extent of her actions. When Grace was released on bail, she looked awful. Her makeup was smudged and her dress wrinkled. When she saw me, she burst into tears, apologizing and pleading for her sister to return. But then she said something that showed me she still didn't understand. She expressed her hope that now that I had seen how far Daniel would go to turn me against my family, I would finally listen to her concerns. I asked what she meant. She claimed Daniel's call to the police demonstrated his controlling and vindictive nature. She claimed that a good man would have forgiven her mistakes and attempted to resolve the situation privately. That's when I realized Grace would never change. Even after being arrested, she continued to make Daniel the villain in her story. I told Grace I didn't want to see her again. I threatened to file a restraining order if she contacted me, Daniel, or anyone else in our lives. My parents attempted to protest, but I was done listening. Daniel and I returned to the venue to rejoin our reception. Most of our guests knew what had happened, but they were supportive and tried to help us salvage the evening. My father called me the next day to apologize. He stated that he was filing for divorce from my mother. He couldn't stay married to someone who encouraged Grace's behavior while blaming me for the consequences. My mother has been calling me nonstop since then, but I have not responded. She left a voicemail saying, "I'm destroying the family and Grace needs help, not punishment. Ava's court date is next month." Her lawyer contacted us to see if we would drop the charges if Grace agreed to stay away from us. We said no. Grace must face real consequences for what she did. Update 3. Grace was sentenced to 6 months probation and mandatory counseling last week. She must also pay restitution for the cost of our wedding security and will be unable to contact Daniel or me for the next 2 years. However, that is not why I'm writing this final update. Something happened that made me realize Grace's problems are much deeper than I previously thought. 3 weeks ago, I received a call from Grace's college roommate, Anna. I hadn't spoken with Anna since graduation, so I was surprised to hear from her. Anna explained that she had heard about Grace's arrest through mutual friends and wanted to tell me something important. She claimed she should have spoken up years ago but was afraid of getting involved in family drama. Anna revealed to me that Grace was obsessed with copying me in ways I was unaware of during college. She stated that Grace would go through my social media accounts and copy my art projects before I posted them. Grace would turn in her copies first, making it appear that I was copying her. Grace had also been intercepting mail and packages addressed to me in our shared department. She had opened acceptance letters from galleries and art competitions that I had entered and discarded the ones that had received positive feedback. Anna asserted that she made an effort to inform me about this during our senior year, but Grace convinced her not to do so because I was already experiencing a great deal of stress due to the fact that I was looking for a job and graduating. But what Anna said after that was the most upsetting part. Earlier than Daniel, she asserted that Grace had been the one to undermine my relationships. When I was in college, Grace would get in touch with the guys I was dating and let them know that I was interested in other people or that I had made negative comments about them. Anna presented me with screenshots that she had saved from a number of years ago. In order to give the impression that I was trash-talking my boyfriends to other people, Grace had fabricated text conversations that were sent to me. It was because she had sent fake screenshots to the guys I was dating that I ended up breaking up with several of them. It was then that I recalled those relationships coming to an abrupt end, with men accusing me of things that I had never said or done. My assumption at the time was that they were either immature or looking for reasons to end their relationship. It never occurred to me that Grace might be involved. Anna expressed regret for the delay in informing me previously. Grace had convinced her that she was protecting me from men who were not good enough, and she claimed that she was young and scared due to the fact that she was younger. I started getting in touch with other college students after I had a conversation with Anna. The accounts of Grace's roommates were confirmed by 2 additional roommates. Over the course of several years, Grace had been purposefully undermining my interactions with other people and my opportunities. After further investigation, I found out that Grace had been spreading the word to others that we intended to launch a business together after we graduated. The portfolio and artwork that I had created had been used by her to apply for jobs, and she claimed that we were a creative team. Following Grace's failure to appear for interviews, a number of potential employers contacted me in an attempt to locate her. Having this information at my disposal, I made the decision to write a letter to Grace's probation officer. I wanted them to comprehend that her actions toward Daniel and me were a reflection of a larger pattern of deception and manipulation that she had been engaging in. I was thanked by the probation officer for providing the information, and she stated that it would be beneficial to Grace in her court-ordered counseling sessions. In the event that Grace desired to steer clear of more significant legal issues in the future, they suggested that she address these more fundamental concerns. When my mother learned about the letter, she immediately called me and yelled at me. At the same time that I was attempting to make Grace's punishment more severe, she accused me of being wicked and cruel. She stated that Grace was ill and sought the support of her family rather than getting into additional legal trouble. For years, Grace had been actively working to undermine my life, and I told my mother that I had reached the point where I could no longer protect her from the consequences of her actions. It was my suggestion that if she wanted to assist Grace, she should encourage her to take responsibility for her actions rather than suggesting that she should make excuses for them. I was embarrassed to be called my mother's daughter because she said I lacked compassion, and that I was heartless. Due to the fact that I had ruined Grace's life, she stated that she would never forgive me. Thereafter, she hung up on me. At a later time on that day, my father called me. Although he claimed that he was not aware of Grace's behavior at college, he did not appear surprised by it. Despite the fact that my mother had refused to seek professional assistance, he stated that he had always suspected that Grace was struggling with serious mental health issues. In addition to this, he disclosed to me that my mother had been sending Grace money while she was on probation, despite the fact that the court had ordered her to work and provide for herself. For the purpose of concealing these payments, my mother had been lying to him about their financial situation. According to my father, he had submitted the necessary paperwork for a divorce and was leaving the family home. The fact that he was tired of being lied to and that he could not continue to enable Grace's behavior through my mother was something that he stated. For the purpose of working through everything that has occurred, Daniel and I have been participating in couples counseling. As a result of Grace's harassment campaign, both of us have been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and our counselor has informed us that it will take some time before we can fully trust that we are safe from her interference. In addition, we were required to relocate to a new apartment and change our phone numbers because Grace had obtained our address and was sending letters despite the restraining order that had issued against her. Although the letters were not threatening in nature, they were lengthy expressions of regret that demonstrated that she was still unable to comprehend the nature of the error she had committed. Since the last time we spoke on the phone, I have not had any contact with my mother. She made an effort to get in touch with me through her relatives, but I requested that they refrain from carrying messages to me. Being in a relationship with someone who thinks I am the bad guy in this scenario is not something I am prepared to do at this time. Ava's probation officer got in touch with me earlier this month to let me know that Grace had broken the terms of her probation by making another attempt to get in touch with Daniel's place of employment. She made a phone call to his boss while pretending to be a customer and inquired about Daniel's personal life as well as his work schedule. Instead of just probation, Grace is now facing the possibility of jail time. During the sentencing, her attorney requested that we testify on her behalf. However, we declined the request. Grace has continued to violate the boundaries set by the court, despite the fact that we have done everything in our power to assist her in avoiding serious consequences. By not assisting Grace with her sentencing, I am aware that some people will consider me to be being overly harsh. However, I have realized that protecting Grace from the consequences of her actions will only allow her to continue to cause harm to other people. Following the conclusion of Daniel's lease, we are planning to move to a different state for our next home. We would like to begin again in a location where Grace will not be able to locate us. Although it may appear to be extreme, we need to be aware that we are completely protected from her obsession. Grace showed me that just because someone is a member of your family does not give them the right to ruin your life. I never considered the possibility that I would permanently cut off my twin sister. The toxic nature of certain relationships, even those that involve people you care about, makes it impossible to repair them. Believing your gut feelings about toxic family members is important for anyone who is in a situation similar to this one. There is no requirement for you to grant anyone access to your life simply due to the fact that you share DNA. In certain circumstances, the most considerate thing you can do for everyone involved is to remove yourself from the situation. My parents accused me of being selfish for not lending my sister money for a house. I left, but my sister kept calling me 62 times a day. I was sitting at my kitchen table, laptop open, reviewing quarterly reports for the consulting firm where I had spent the previous 8 years, rising from junior analyst to senior project manager. My phone vibrated. Charlotte's name illuminated the screen. "Hey, Jess," she said, her voice bright with desire. "Got a minute? I need to talk about something important." My older sister had always possessed this talent for making her problems sound like shared family emergencies. I closed my laptop, already bracing myself. "Ethan and I found the perfect house," she continued without waiting for my response. 4 bedrooms, renovated kitchen, walking distance to those private schools we've been researching. The sellers accepted our offer, but there's a gap in our down payment. I stared at the wall calendar across from me, where I'd circled my upcoming trip to Barcelona. The consulting contract I'd negotiated would begin in 3 weeks. My apartment lease had another 4 months left, but I'd already discussed breaking it early with my landlord. My work visa was approved 3 weeks ago after months of paperwork, and everything was in order. I asked how much of a gap there was, but something in my chest knew where this was going. 45,000. We're exactly $math BBS 45. $0 short. She paused, allowing the number to sink in. I know you've been saving aggressively. Dad mentioned you had around 80,000 inches your accounts. My jaw tightened. Dad had no business discussing my finances with anyone, but that argument could wait. Charlotte, that money represents years of careful planning. I eat budget meals. I haven't taken a real vacation in 4 years, and I've been working towards something specific. Right. Your big European adventure, she said, dismissiveness creeping in. Olivia, I'm talking about a house, a real investment, a place where Ethan and I can build our future, where our kids will grow up. You're talking about temporarily relocating for some contract work that might not even pan out. The dismissal hurt more than I anticipated. Charlotte had always been the golden child. We married at the age of 24 to a man our parents adored. Working a respectable job at a pharmaceutical company, discussing children and mortgages while seemingly wasting my life on career goals. My contract is signed, I said quietly. The Barcelona firm is expecting me. This is not a whim. Then wait 6 months, maybe a year. Help me secure this house. And once Ethan gets his promotion, we'll pay you back with interest. I'd heard variations of this promise throughout our childhood. Charlotte borrowing my birthday money to buy concert tickets, which she'd certainly repay. Charlotte driving my car on a road trip and returning it with an empty tank and a broken tail light. Charlotte took credit for the history project I assisted her in finishing because she mentioned my contribution to the teacher. I'm not delaying my career for your down payment, I said, as the line went silent. When Charlotte spoke again, her voice had dropped to that dangerous quiet. You're being extremely selfish right now. I'm your sister. Family helps family. But apparently, your little sabbatical adventure matters more than my actual life. It's not spatial. Mom and Dad will be so disappointed when they hear about this after everything they've done for you. And you can't even help your own sister when she needs you. She hung up before I could respond. 3 hours passed, and I tried to focus on work, but my concentration had been shattered. Then my phone rang again. Dad's number. Olivia, he said, skipping any greeting. Charlotte called us, very upset, and explained the situation with the house. Charlotte's accomplishments were lauded, while my own were met with polite nods, and her setbacks became family emergencies, while my struggles were opportunities for character development. Did she explain that she wants more than half of my savings? She explained that you refused to assist your sister in securing housing for her family, and your mother is beside herself. We raised you to be better than this. Dad, I have plans, contractual obligations, and a career opportunity that could change my entire trajectory. And Charlotte has a family to think about. He countered. She's building something real, something stable, and you're chasing consulting contracts across Europe like a college kid on spring break. The comparison landed right where he intended. At 32, I was still being treated as the irresponsible younger daughter, whose dreams were cute but ultimately frivolous in comparison to Charlotte's traditional life path. I'm not giving her my savings, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Then you better reconsider your priorities, Dad said, because if you can't support your family when they need you, don't expect us to support your impulsive decisions. He abruptly disconnected. I sat motionless for a few minutes, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to silence. Then something changed inside me. Not anger, exactly, but a crystallizing clarity I had never felt before. I opened my laptop and looked up the Barcelona contract. Reading it again, I felt the flutter of excitement I had been suppressing beneath layers of family guilt. The position was ideal, leading a team of analysts for a multinational expansion project, working with cutting-edge methodologies, and earning nearly double my current salary plus generous housing benefits. My phone vibrated with a text from Charlotte. Dad said, "You're being difficult. This is your last chance to do the right thing before I withdraw my offer to repay you." She made an offer as if she was doing me a favor by suggesting that she might eventually return the money she wanted me to give her. I texted back a single word. No. Then I opened my banking app and purchased a one-way ticket to Barcelona, departing in 6 days rather than 3 weeks. The earlier flight cost an additional math BBS $800. But seeing the confirmation that the process was completed felt like breaking through water after being held underwater for too long. My phone rang immediately. Charlotte. What the hell, Olivia? You can't, but I can. So I did. I leave in 6 days. You're making an enormous mistake. When this contract fails and you return broke and embarrassed, don't expect any of us to bail you out. I wouldn't dream of it, I said, and hung up the phone for 90 minutes. Blessed silence. I began making a packing list, researching Barcelona neighborhoods, and emailed my new supervisor to confirm my earlier arrival date. She responded enthusiastically, saying they could use me for some preliminary work before the official start date. Then Dad texted, "Sign off on Charlotte's mortgage as a co-signer, or don't bother returning. Your mother agrees. We support your sister." I read it 3 times, each time revealing new layers of manipulation. They wanted my signature, which meant Charlotte's financial situation was worse than she had previously admitted. It was bad enough that she required a co-signer with my credit score and savings to qualify for the mortgage at all. Co-signing entailed liability. If Charlotte and Ethan defaulted, the debt would become mine, my credit would plummet, my savings could be seized. The Barcelona contract would be meaningless because I'd be indebted to my sister's financial decisions forever. My hands shook as I typed, "I'm not co-signing anything, and if not returning is the cost of living my own life, I'll accept it." His response was instant. "You are no longer welcome in our family. Do not contact your mother, she's too upset to speak with you anyway." Something broke within me. However, rather than the expected collapse, it felt like a door slamming shut on a drafty room. Sudden silence, sudden warmth. I opened my laptop and started working through a mental checklist I hadn't realized I was creating. First, I checked every financial account I had. My savings account showed $math BBS $72,450, which was less than Dad had quoted Charlotte, implying that he had exaggerated my assets in order to put pressure on me. My checking account held an additional $8,200, and while my investment portfolio was worth $math BBS $23,600. Then I identified the issue. Years ago, when I was 24 and Charlotte was planning her wedding, I added her as an authorized user on one of my credit cards to assist her with vendor booking. She promised it was only temporary, until her own credit improved after the expenses. I had completely forgotten about it. The card now had a balance of $math BBS $6,847. Recent expenses included boutique purchases, restaurant bills, and a spa package. All within the last 3 weeks, roughly when Charlotte would have been preparing her pitch for my savings. My phone was constantly buzzing now. Mom's number and Charlotte's again. I suspected that the unknown numbers represented other family members being mobilized for the guilt campaign. I ignored them all and called the credit card company. "I need to remove an authorized user and dispute recent charges," I told the representative. While on hold, I checked my bank's website and discovered something worse. Charlotte had designated herself as a beneficiary in one of my savings accounts. Not joint ownership, but I am in a position to claim the funds if anything happens to me. The setup dated back 5 years. Another favor I had granted but forgotten. Another way she had integrated herself into my financial life. The credit card representative has returned. "We have removed Charlotte Chan as an authorized user. Concerning the disputed charges, we will need to investigate. I authorized her card access years ago, but never approved these specific purchases," I explained. After I denied her a loan request, she used the card without my knowledge or consent. This was technically correct. The representative's tone shifted, becoming more sympathetic. She initiated a fraud investigation and temporarily reversed the charges while they reviewed the case. I then called my bank. Removing Charlotte as beneficiary required a simple form, which they emailed to me right away. I completed it and scanned it back within minutes. And then I proceeded. Charlotte had my login information for a shared streaming service we'd split for years, and it matched my primary email address, which was linked to my banking, investments, and entire digital life. I'd been meaning to change it forever, using work or exhaustion as excuses, but I never imagined needing this level of security against my own sister. I changed every password, security question, recovery email, and phone number, and enabled 2-factor authentication on accounts that had previously relied solely on trust. Each change felt like closing a window I'd left open for years, unaware of how vulnerable I'd been. Around 11 p.m., my phone had 2-3 missed calls. The overnight representative seemed perplexed by my urgency until I explained that I was protecting my assets from family members who had access to my personal information. I then contacted my investment broker and added additional security protocols, including verbal passwords for all transactions and no changes to beneficiary designations without in-person verification and government ID. "That's actually more common than you think," she said politely. "I'm setting up the extra protection now. Your accounts are securely locked down." Finally, around midnight, I opened my email and sent a message to everyone in my immediate family. "I'm relocating to Barcelona for a consulting assignment. I will not co-sign Charlotte's mortgage, contribute to her down payment, or continue to share financial access with family members. Every account has been secured. This is not negotiable or open to discussion. I wish everyone well." I provided my professional email address, which they did not have, and stated that my personal email would be discontinued. Then I pressed send and shut down my laptop. Sleep appeared impossible, but exhaustion drew me under around 2 a.m. I awoke at 7 a.m. to my phone persistently vibrating despite being in silent mode. The screen displayed 62 missed calls, 34 text messages, and 12 voicemails. I made coffee first, then sat down and started reading. Charlotte's text became increasingly angry, desperate, and threatening throughout the night. 1:15 a.m. You're petty. I cannot believe you completed everything. We needed that card to cover closing costs. 1:47 a.m. Ethan is furious. You have ruined everything. The house is going to collapse because of you. 2:23 a.m. Dad is right. You are selfish and immature, and you will end up alone with your stupid career. 3:08 a.m. Thank you, Olivia, please. We are family. I beg you to reconsider. 3:45 a.m. Fine. Keep your money, but don't come back when your Barcelona dream falls through. Dad's voicemail messages were colder. You've made your decision. Do not expect to be invited to family events. Your mom is devastated. I hope what you're pursuing is worth losing all of us. Mom left one message, her voice full of tears. I don't understand why you are so cruel to your sister. She has always looked up to you, and this is how you repay her love. The last one nearly broke my resolve. Almost. Then I remembered being 14, working my first job at a frozen yogurt shop and saving for a school trip to Washington, D.C. I kept my money in a lockbox under my bed. One morning, half of it was gone. Charlotte had taken it for a concert ticket, and when confronted, Mom had said, "She's your older sister. Sharing is what families do." I'd never been to Washington. The coffee tasted bitter, but I drank it anyway, feeling the caffeine sharpening my mind. I had 4 days until my flight. I had 4 days to finish severing ties in order to prepare for a life in which my family's emergencies were no longer a mandatory crisis. Around 9 a.m., Charlotte called from Ethan's phone. I responded, curious about the new angle she'd take. Olivia. Ethan's voice is measured and diplomatic. Look, I believe things became heated last night. We're all stressed out about the house situation. Can we meet for coffee and discuss this like adults? There's nothing to discuss. My decision is final. I understand your frustration, but shutting down the credit card in the middle of our closing process was excessive. Charlotte has been crying all night. She had no idea those charges would cause such a problem. She charged nearly math BBS $7.0 without asking permission. Ethan, while demanding an additional math BBS $45.0. What part of that seems acceptable to you? His pause extended far enough that I could hear Charlotte coaching him in the background, her voice an urgent whisper. She assumed the card was still available for family use, he said finally. She attempted to furnish our future home. Make it nice for when we have children. After I explicitly refused to fund your down payment, my voice remained level, which appeared to unsettle him more than anger would have. Ethan, I sincerely hope you two can work out the housing situation, but not with my financial support. Are you really going to let your sister lose her dream home over this? Charlotte is 35 years old, married, and earns 2 incomes. If you can't afford this house, consider something less expensive. That is what adults do. I hung up before he could reply. The following 3 days blurred together. Packing, forwarding mail, and discussing an early lease termination with my landlord. Mrs. Patterson was surprisingly accommodating when I explained that I was leaving for Barcelona 4 months ahead of schedule. She'd lived in Spain for a decade in her 20s and spoke wisely about Mediterranean sunsets and the freedom to reinvent. You're doing the brave thing, she said, agreeing to a fair early termination fee that I could easily pay. Most people spend their entire lives thinking about it. Every evening, my phone's missed call count increased. Several cousins, family friends, and even Charlotte's college roommate, whom I'd met only twice. Everyone had been recruited to persuade me that I was making a terrible mistake by severing family bonds over money and betraying the sister who had always been there for me. On the second day, my cousin Maxwell arrived at my apartment unexpectedly. I opened the door to find him standing there with coffee and an apologetic expression, which immediately put me on edge. Before you slam the door, he said, I'm not here to lecture you. Can I come in for 5 minutes? Despite my better judgment, I let him in. He surveyed the half-packed boxes and the growing pile of items tagged for donation. You're really doing this, he said, sounding impressed rather than judgmental. I really am. Derek set the coffee on my kitchen counter and leaned against it, arms crossed. Your dad called my mom, asked her to contact me, and I would talk some sense into you. He painted a picture of you abandoning the family in their time of need. And you came to deliver that message? Hell no, I came to tell you I think you're a badass. He grinned. Charlotte's been a nightmare since we were kids. Remember when she convinced everyone I'd stolen money from Grandma's purse at Christmas? Turned out she'd taken it for some limited edition makeup palette. But I was the one who got grounded for 3 months. I'd forgotten about that incident, but it came back to me now. Maxwell's protests of innocence, Charlotte's tearful insistence that she'd seen him near Grandma's purse, and the family division that had lasted well into spring. Why didn't anyone believe you? I inquired. The same reason they don't believe you now. Charlotte has always been good at playing the victim while orchestrating chaos. He picked up his coffee cup. Anyway, I wanted you to know that not everyone thinks you're the villain here. My mother doesn't either, for what it's worth. She just won't contradict your dad publicly. After Derek left, I felt a little less isolated, but the calls kept coming, each from someone who had blindly accepted Charlotte's version of events and couldn't believe that the quiet, responsible younger sister could have legitimate complaints. My former college roommate, Isabel, called that evening, and unlike the others, she said, "Tell me your side." So I did. I explained the years of small borrowings that became large debts, the expectation that my success existed to subsidize Charlotte's lifestyle, the credit card charges, the co-signing demand, and my parents' ultimatum. When I finished, Isabel said, "Jesus, and they're making you out to be the monster, pretty much. Olivia, I've known you for 12 years, and you're the person who budgeted for 6 months before buying a new laptop. The idea that you'd refuse to help family over petty selfishness is insane." She paused. "For whatever it's worth, I think you're making the right choice, and I'm jealous as hell that you have the courage to do it." We talked for another hour about Barcelona, the contract, and the life I was building toward, and by the time we hung up, some of the doubt that had been accumulating had vanished. The third day brought an unexpected visitor, Ethan's older brother, Benjamin, whom I'd met perhaps 3 times at family events. He caught me in the parking garage as I was loading boxes into a friend's truck for storage. "Olivia, wait," he called, jogging toward me. I turned, wary. Benjamin had always seemed decent, but family loyalty ran deep. "Look, I'm supposed to be here convincing you to reconsider," he said, slightly out of breath. "Ethan had asked me to talk to you, appeal to your sense of family responsibility, and so on," but he hesitated. "But I've been watching my brother and your sister's financial train wreck for 2 years now, and I told him months ago that they couldn't afford the house they were pursuing." Benjamin shook his head, and they ignored every piece of practical advice I gave them. "Ethan has been living beyond his means since college, and Charlotte enables it while exacerbating the problem with her own spending. I had assumed Ethan was the stable one, the responsible husband grounding Charlotte's impulsiveness. Their credit is terrible," Benjamin continued. "They've maxed out multiple cards, are barely making minimum payments, and somehow convinced themselves that a massive mortgage was the solution. When Ethan told me they'd lined you up as a co-signer, I warned him you'd be insane to agree. He didn't mention it, of course, because I also told him that if they defaulted, they'd destroy your credit and probably your career prospects." He looked me in the eyes and said, "Dodging this bullet is the smartest thing you could have done." After Benjamin left, I sat in my nearly empty apartment, feeling vindicated but also unsettled, wondering how many other family members privately agreed with me but publicly supported Charlotte out of obligation or fear of conflict. That night, I received an email from Charlotte herself. No subject line, just several paragraphs of raw emotion. "Olivia, I've spent the last 3 days trying to understand how you could be so cruel. We're sisters. We shared a childhood, parents, everything, and the first time I asked you for real help, you turned your back on me. Do you remember when you were 16 and wanted to go to that art program in Rhode Island? Mom and Dad said it was too expensive, so I used my graduation money to help pay for it. I've always sacrificed for you, and now I'm asking for the same support, and you're acting as if I'm a stranger trying to scam you. I was furnishing our house with credit card charges, a place where you'd be welcome at any time, and where your future nieces and nephews would have grown up knowing their aunt. But instead, you've chosen a job over family, money over love, and when you're sitting alone in some foreign country with nobody who actually cares about you, remember that you made this choice." I read it twice, then opened my documents folder and found the art program information from 16 years ago. It took some searching, but I eventually found the financial records my parents had kept, and the program had cost $Math BBS 3, $0. Charlotte's graduation money had gone toward a car, a detail I remembered vividly because she had driven it to my high school graduation and accidentally scraped the bumper, which I had felt guilty about for years despite the fact that I hadn't been driving. Mom and Dad had contributed $800, and the remaining $400 had come from our grandmother, not Charlotte. I didn't respond to her email because there was nothing to say to someone who would lie that egregiously and expect to go unchallenged. I awoke at 4 a.m. on the morning of my departure, too agitated to sleep. Perhaps she had always known the truth and counted on me not checking. I made coffee and stood by my apartment window, watching Philadelphia's pre-dawn streets, wondering if I'd feel nostalgic later for this view, this city, this life I was leaving. I didn't feel nostalgic, I felt free. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Please don't go. We can work this out. Family is everything. I stared at that message for a long time. Family is everything. The phrase that had governed my entire existence, that had been wielded like a weapon every time I considered prioritizing myself. But family wasn't everything. Some families were toxic, some families demanded you set yourself on fire to provide them with warmth, and some families loved you conditionally. Only when you were useful, compliant, and willing to give up your dreams for their comfort, I typed back. Families should want what's best for each other. This is what's best for me. Then I silenced my phone, gathered my luggage, and headed for the airport. But Charlotte had never been there for me. Not when I'd worked 3 part-time jobs to avoid student loans and she partied her way through undergrad on mom and dad's money. Not when I'd spent my 27th birthday alone in a hospital waiting room during an appendectomy because she'd been too busy with wedding dress shopping. Not when I'd been passed over for promotion last year and she'd responded with, well, maybe if you were more of a team player like Ethan. The realizations kept coming, each one a small earthquake, rearranging my internal landscape. The night before my flight, I had a moment of doubt. I sat in my empty apartment, surrounded by suitcases and boxes designated for storage, and considered calling Charlotte, apologizing, and finding some compromise that would restore the family peace. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Olivia, this is Aunt Eleanor, my mother's older sister, a woman I'd always respected for her directness. Hello, Aunt Eleanor. I'm calling because your mother asked me to, but not for the reason she thinks. Eleanor's voice carried a wry amusement, and she wanted me to convince you to help Charlotte with this house purchase. Instead, I'm calling to congratulate you on your new job and to see if you need anything before leaving. The kindness caught me completely off guard, and my throat tightened. Thank you. I managed. Your mother means well, but she's always enabled Charlotte's entitlement, as has your father. They've spent 3 decades treating you as the responsible one who doesn't need support because you're so capable, while Charlotte is rescued from every consequence. She paused. I watched you grow up apologizing for taking up space while your sister demanded the spotlight. If you don't leave now, you'll still be apologizing at 50. Tears spilled over before I could stop them. I'm scared, I admitted. What if they're right? What if I regret this? You'll regret it in Barcelona with an international career and your savings intact. Eleanor said firmly. We talked for another hour, and she told me stories about my mother and Charlotte's relationship that I'd never heard before. Patterns that appeared to be repeating themselves across generations. It was much better than regretting it in Philadelphia, where you were broken and resentful, wondering what you could have become. When we hung up, something settled in my chest. Not exactly certainty, but the absence of that desperate need for family approval that had governed my decisions for 3 decades. I boarded the flight at $6 Mathroom, 12, Mathroom PM, $, the next day. My phone stayed in airplane mode. Barcelona welcomed me with golden light and Mediterranean warmth. My new company had arranged an apartment overlooking a narrow street lined with cafes, their outdoor tables filled with people speaking rapid Spanish, their laughter rising toward my 3rd floor. The first week was a blur of orientation meetings, team introductions, and intensive language practice with a company-provided tutor. My supervisor, Sophia, was demanding but encouraging, pushing our team toward innovative approaches while trusting our expertise. And she introduced me to her network throughout the city. And suddenly, I was having dinners with professionals from 6 different countries, discussing projects and possibilities I'd never imagined accessible. 2 weeks later, I finally checked the phone number I'd kept active for emergencies, and there were 43 new voicemails. I deleted them without listening, but I did read through the texts, watching the evolution from anger to bargaining to a kind of resigned hostility. Charlotte's final message, sent 3 days after I left. The house fell through, and Ethan's parents had to co-sign a different property in a worse neighborhood because you weren't the only one who refused to help us. I hope you're happy. You've destroyed our future for your selfish adventure. A week later, I received a Facebook message from someone I hadn't thought about in years. Rachel, Charlotte's maid of honor from her wedding. Reading that, I felt something, but it wasn't guilt. It was clarity. Their backup plan had involved multiple people refusing to take on their financial risk, and I wasn't the villain. I was simply the first person who'd said no. We'd never been close, but she'd always been nice to me at family gatherings. Olivia, I hope this doesn't come across as intrusive, but I wanted to reach out because Charlotte's been constantly posting about what happened, painting you as this selfish monster, and it's not sitting right with me. I've known Charlotte for 15 years and have seen her pull similar stunts on other people. Rachel told me stories I'd never heard before. Charlotte borrowing money from mutual friends and never repaying it. Charlotte taking credit for group projects in college. And Charlotte manipulating situations to ensure she always came out looking like the victim or the hero. You're the first person who said no and stuck to it. We ended up video chatting that evening. Rachel reminisced about a time in senior year when Charlotte persuaded 3 of us to put down math BBS $400 each for a beach house rental for spring break. When she discovered the place was already booked, she took our money and saved it for the following year, which never came. Why did you remain friends with her? I inquired. Rachel's expression turned rueful. Honestly, because being on Charlotte's good side was easier than being on her bad side. She's charming and entertaining when she wants to be. But if you cross her, she'll launch a campaign against you that makes high school bullying appear subtle. She paused. I'm not proud of that, but seeing what she's doing to you now, how she's mobilized your entire family against you, has finally made me realize how toxic that friendship was, and I've been gradually distancing myself. That conversation shifted something in me. I'd spent weeks second-guessing myself, wondering if I'd overreacted, audibly, if I should have found some compromise. But Rachel's perspective confirmed what I'd suspected. Charlotte's behavior wasn't about me specifically, it was a pattern. And I was just the first person in our family brave enough to break it. My work in Barcelona intensified as I progressed from orientation to actual project management. Our team was developing a supply chain optimization model for a client, expanding into Eastern European markets, and the complexity was exhilarating. Sophia pushed us hard but celebrated our victories enthusiastically, and I found myself working longer hours than I ever had in Philadelphia while feeling energized rather than drained. 3 weeks into the project, Sophia pulled me aside after a successful presentation to the client, saying, "Olivia, you have exceptional instincts for this work." Sophia continued, "When we hired you, we saw your resume and were confident in your technical skills, but we'd had challenges with some American hires adjusting to the international environment, cultural differences, and ambiguity. Thank you for identifying those bottlenecks in the distribution network. It's a fascinating project. I had concerns about whether you'd thrive here." My stomach tightened slightly. "And now I'm wondering if you'd consider extending your contract beyond the initial term. We have projects lined up in Amsterdam, Prague, and potentially Singapore. You'd be leading larger teams, taking on more strategic responsibility." She told me. "Essentially, I'm asking if you'd be interested in making this permanent rather than temporary." The offer was everything I'd hoped for, but hadn't expected it to come so quickly. I told Sophia that I would need some time to think about it, but I already knew the answer. The life I was creating here felt more authentic than the one I'd left behind. That evening, I walked through the Gothic Quarter, watching tourists and locals mix in the plazas before calling Isabel. They offered me a permanent position. I told her about my international projects, significant raise, and leadership track. "Olivia, that is incredible. Will you take it?" "I believe so. But it entails fully committing to this life. No more pretending that this is only temporary. There is no longer a safety net of returning to Philadelphia if things do not go as planned." "Would you like to return to Philadelphia?" Isabel inquired pointedly. I reflected on my empty apartment, my family's conditional love, and the weight of expectations I had carried for 3 decades. "No, I honestly don't." "Then stop treating this incredible opportunity as if you need permission to be happy. Take the job, build your life, send me photos of Barcelona sunsets, and make me jealous." I accepted Sophia's offer the following day. Signing the contract felt like the moment the plane's wheels left the runway. That moment of determined flight when turning back becomes impossible. My new permanent status necessitated paperwork, visa extensions, opening a local bank account, and securing a long-term apartment. Each administrative task felt like planting roots and anchoring myself in this new reality. I spent weekends looking for an apartment, eventually finding one near Park de Della with tall windows and a small balcony where I could drink morning coffee and watch the neighborhood wake up. The day I signed the lease, I took a photo of the empty living room, sunlight streaming across hardwood floors, and posted it to social media with a simple caption, "Home." Within hours, comments poured in from college friends, former colleagues, and Philadelphia acquaintances congratulating me. However, family members, cousins, my uncle, and even some of my parents' friends commented with variations of "beautiful" and "so happy for you." Regardless of the family drama, those statements of support felt pointed and deliberate. Charlotte declined to comment, but she did send a direct message. "Cute apartment. Must be nice to spend my house money on yourself." I quickly blocked her, surprised by how little hesitation I felt. Around this time, Sophia suggested that I start therapy with an English-speaking psychologist. Dr. Martinez specialized in expats and cultural adjustment, but our sessions quickly shifted to addressing family dynamics and the guilt I still felt about choosing myself. During our third session, Dr. Martinez noticed that you discuss your family's needs as if they were objective facts. But needs and wants are not the same thing. Your sister wanted your money. She didn't need it. But the house? There are thousands of houses. If they couldn't afford that particular house, they could have chosen another. Their desire became framed as a need to manipulate you. The sessions helped me realize how deeply I had been conditioned to prioritize others' desires over my own. Olivia's needs had been pushed to the back because family came first. How what I thought was selfishness was really just basic self-preservation. Weeks became months. The consulting project exceeded all expectations. Our team finished ahead of schedule and under budget, and the client was already negotiating an extension. Sophia offered me a permanent position with a significant raise and the opportunity to partner. I found my own apartment, a sunny space near Parc d'Odadella. I learned Spanish with increasing fluency, made friends with coworkers and neighbors, and spent weekends exploring the Catalan countryside. I dated casually, nothing serious, but I learned what it felt like to have conversations in which my professional goals were admired rather than tolerated. 6 months after leaving Philadelphia, Aunt Eleanor sent me an email with a subject line, "I thought you should know." Inside was a forwarded news story about a local woman arrested for insurance fraud. Charlotte. The details were sparse, but it appeared that she and Ethan attempted to stage a burglary at their rental property in order to collect on an inflated contents policy. The investigation turned up previous suspicious claims. I read it 3 times and felt strangely detached. My childhood sister felt like someone from another lifetime, reliving someone else's experiences. Eleanor's note at the bottom simply stated, "Your parents are mortified, but still blaming you. Thought you'd want to know." I replied, "Thank you for keeping me informed, and thank you for the conversation before I left. It changed everything." 3 more months passed. As Christmas approached, my first time completely alone, I realized I was feeling excited rather than sad. I had been invited to 7 different celebrations by friends and colleagues. I chose a dinner hosted by Sophia and her wife, where we ate too much and laughed until midnight, and I felt more at ease than I had in decades of forced family reunions. My phone rang as I was walking home through festive streets, my breath visible in the unusual cold. Unknown phone number with the Philadelphia area code. I nearly declined, but curiosity won. "Hello, Olivia." "It's Mom." I paused walking. People moved around me, couples and groups on their way to late-night celebrations. "How did you obtain this number?" Eleanor handed it to me. "Please don't get angry with her," I begged. She paused, and I could hear her gaining courage. "Your father is not aware that I am calling." "What do you want, Mother?" "I wanted to wish you a Merry Christmas." Her voice crackled. "And I wanted to apologize for everything. For siding with Charlotte without first hearing your point of view. For treating your ambitions as hobbies and elevating hers. For raising you to believe you were selfish if you weren't willing to give up everything for your family." I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, trying to process. "What has changed?" I finally asked. "Charlotte's legal troubles forced me to see things clearly," she explained. "The fraud, the lies to the insurance company, the financial disaster she and Ethan caused. Everything looked familiar because I'd seen her manipulate and scheme her entire life. But I named it ambition. I called it a support request." She breathed shakily. "And I called you selfish for refusing to allow it." "Dad still disagrees. Your father is stubborn, but he has also begun to question where we went wrong with Charlotte. He will not admit it to you. Probably not for years, but he is aware." A prolonged pause. "You were correct to leave, Olivia. You were correct about everything." "Right." We talked for 1 hour. She inquired about Barcelona, my work, and my life with genuine interest that I could not recall receiving previously. I told her some of it cautiously, trying to determine whether this change was due to genuine guilt or just a temporary feeling. Before hanging up, she said, "I don't expect you to forgive me right away, or perhaps ever. But I needed you to know that I see you now, for who you are, not who I projected onto you, and I'm proud of you." I cried as we parted ways. Standing on a corner in Barcelona's Gothic quarter, tears freezing on my cheeks. However, they were not tears of regret. The Barcelona project led to a permanent position and then a promotion. I created a life that I never imagined possible. Professionally fulfilled, financially secure, and surrounded by people who valued my capabilities over my compliance. 9 months after I left, Charlotte sent me a carefully worded email. No real apology. Just an acknowledgement that things got complicated and a suggestion that we reconnect once tensions had subsided. I responded politely but without commitment, and the correspondence faded naturally. Dad never called. It hurts sometimes in quiet moments. However, the pain was clean. Not the infected wound of continued manipulation, but the healthy ache of a cut that is healing correctly. A year and a half after leaving Philadelphia, I was in my Barcelona apartment reviewing a proposal for a project in Singapore. My team was invited to consult on a much larger international expansion than the one that had brought me here. 2-year minimum commitment, extraordinary compensation. My phone sat silently on the counter. There were no missed calls from family members demanding my time, money, or consent. There is no guilt in choosing my path. I accepted the Singapore offer that evening and called Aunt Eleanor to let her know. "You sound happy," she said. "I am genuinely happy. Your mother will be pleased to hear this. She constantly asks about you. Tell her I'm thriving. Tell her I am right where I am supposed to be. Because I am." My brother tackled my groom before the vows. I screamed at him, then realized he'd tried to save my damn life. As I came down the aisle, my brother dashed past me with a gas can, doused the entire altar in gasoline, and set it on fire before tackling my groom directly into the burning flowers. My veil caught fire as guests stampeded toward the exit, shouting, while my brother pinned my fiancé down amid the flames, hitting him and yelling something I couldn't understand over the noise. The groomsmen carried my brother away, while my fiancé rolled on the ground, second-degree burns covering his hands and arms. My mother sobbed so hard that she vomited on her dress. My father was yelling at my brother for destroying our family, and 300 guests screamed and dialed 911. My brother continued to resist the 4 men who were holding him down, blood gushing from the nose where the best man had struck him, still shouting that my fiancé was attempting to kill me. Everyone was soothing my burned and bleeding fiancé, who was crying, while older guests need medical attention because of the panic, and the flower girl was devastated beyond words. The priest was praying over the broken altar while a bridesmaid wailed over how my brother had ruined the most important day of my life, when security arrived to arrest him. "Check the champagne he was about to give her for the toast," my brother yelled as cops handcuffed him, his voice raspy from smoke inhalation. "He's been poisoning her with mercury for months, and today's dose would have killed her before you cut the cake." Everyone became silent, except for the fire that remained blazing through what used to be our ceremonial space. And my brother continued to speak quickly since he knew he just had a few seconds before being hauled away. "Look at her hands shaking, her hair falling out in chunks. The confusion she thinks is wedding stress, but it's actually mercury poisoning from the makeup he's been switching out since March when they moved in together." My quivering hands moved to my thinning hair, which I had been finding on my pillow every morning. And my brother kept going, exhibiting texts from his phone that the officers hadn't yet collected. I have screenshots of him asking his pharmacist friend about lethal doses and how to make it look like sudden illness, plus receipts for mercury compounds he bought online using cryptocurrency so it couldn't be traced. My fiancé attempted to stand, but the best man stopped him, though I noted the grip had shifted from supporting to restraining as uncertainty crept across his face. He took out a $3 million life insurance policy on her last month without telling her, and their honeymoon suite already has a syringe of concentrated mercury hidden in his luggage that would have caused complete organ failure within hours of injection. My aunt, a nurse, approached the champagne table and dipped her finger in my glass, then jerked back, saying it smelled off, like metal and chemicals mingled with the champagne. More guests began checking their phones, looking up mercury poisoning symptoms, and staring at me as they recognized the symptoms I'd been exhibiting for months, which we'd all attributed to wedding planning stress. My brother was able to pull up further proof on his phone, displaying bank statements indicating that my fiancé had been depleting my savings account in small increments that I hadn't seen since I was too bewildered to check, preparing himself financially for after my death. But that's not even the worst part, my brother exclaimed as 2 officers grabbed his arms and his voice broke with despair. My fiancé had already given me a partial dose this morning in my breakfast smoothie, knowing it would take effect during the reception to make my death look more natural, and the antidote window was closing fast because mercury binds to your organs within hours. My brother had broken into my fiancé's apartment last night and discovered his journal documenting every dose he'd given me for 6 months, with notes about my increasing symptoms and calculations for how much more He'd gone to the police at 2 a.m., but the chief, my fiancé's uncle, stated there wasn't enough evidence for an arrest, and then called my fiancé right away to warn him that my brother was causing trouble, which is why my fiancé bumped up the timing. That's when my brother understood that the only way to save me was to cancel the wedding before I drank the last dose. And lighting the altar on fire was the only way to ensure that the wedding could not proceed because my fiancé had duped me into believing my brother was envious and unstable. The crowd turned to look at my fiancé, whose expression had changed from victim to cold and calculating as he realized his scheme had been exposed to 300 witnesses. 2 groomsmen grabbed his arms, but he was already going faster than anyone anticipated of someone with burns, adrenaline overcoming his anguish. The cake table was just behind him, so he grabbed the ornamental knife we were going to use for cutting and spun toward me before anyone could react or stop him. His scorched palm gripped my neck, despite the anguish it must have given him, and the blade pressed against my throat as he drew me back against his chest, using me as a shield. The police officers who had been arresting my brother paused, hands on their firearms. But my fiancé was using me as a fantastic human shield, so they couldn't get a good shot. "Everyone, stay exactly where you are," he urged, his voice chilly and methodical, as if he were reading from a pharmacology textbook. "Or I'll finish what I started right here in front of everyone." The blade cut deeper as he dragged me backward toward the kitchen doors, leaving 300 people transfixed in amazement. My brother battled the 2 cops who were holding him and yelled for my fiancé to let me go. His expression contorted with desperation as he saw the man he'd tried to stop use me as a shield. The best man, who had been holding my fiancé back, dropped his arms entirely and stepped away with his hands up, suddenly realizing he'd been defending someone who had been poisoning me for several months. Even with the knife digging into my skin, I pushed myself to speak, telling my fiancé that everyone knew the truth, and that hurting me would make no difference. He drew me closer to his scorched chest and remarked that if he was going down anyhow, he may as well finish what he started because the mercury was now in my system. The priest stepped forward with both hands raised, as if confronting a ferocious animal, and begged my fiancé to consider his soul and what this meant for eternity. My fiancé chuckled at that bitter sound, which was unlike anything I'd ever heard from him before, and stated God stopped listening to him years ago when the debt began to pile up and I became his only way out. A massive crack split the air as a portion of the blazing altar collapsed, sending sparks flying over the church floor, making everyone flinch, including my fiancé. I pushed my elbow back into his scorched ribs as hard as I could, and his grip relaxed just enough for me to drop my whole weight while turning away from the blade. As I dropped, the knife grabbed my shoulder, slicing through my dress and into my skin, but I kept moving, landing hard on the marble floor while my fiancé lunged for me. Before he could reach me, 3 officers rushed him, sending the knife flying across the floor as they pinned him down, his scorched hands leaving bloody prints on the white marble as he battled them. EMTs hurried up to me as cops handcuffed my fiancé, who screamed that I deserved it because I was too ignorant to see what he was doing for 6 months. My brother broke free from the officers who were holding him and went on his knees beside me, again apologizing for not finding another way to save me. Tears mixed with the blood that still flowed from his nose. The EMTs put bandages against my shoulder wound while stating that I needed to be sent to the hospital straight away for something called compilation therapy to treat the mercury poisoning. My mother sank into my father's arm, sobbing, and I overheard him tell my brother that he had saved my life. His voice breaking on the words. The EMTs pulled me onto a stretcher and rushed me out, past all of the wedding guests who were still stunned, past the flaming altar, which was now mostly smoking ruins, and past the champagne table, where my poisoned glass remained. In the ambulance, an EMT with the name Blake began an IV in my arm, while stressing that mercury poisoning required quick treatment to avoid permanent organ damage. My entire body was shivering, but not from fear. The poison was attacking my nervous system, causing my muscles to quiver and jerk uncontrollably. Blake started talking in a steady voice about how the therapy would help, but I could barely hear him because my eyesight was blurry and my head felt like it was full of cotton. The ambulance arrived at the emergency room and they pushed me right in, where a doctor, who turned out to be the same Blake from the ambulance, took over my case. He immediately ordered blood tests to confirm the mercury levels, and nurses connected me up to monitors that began beeping with my vital signs. Blake said that the 2 medicines would bind to the mercury, allowing my body to eliminate it, but we had found it just in time thanks to my brother's intervention. The blood draw made me dizzy, and I could see my hands shaking even more, these small tremors that I couldn't control no matter how hard I tried to keep them still. Blake explained that this was common for mercury poisoning and that the shaking will subside once the treatment began, but it could take weeks or even months to fully recover. It's interesting that my fiancé's uncle is the police chief who ignored the evidence at 2 a.m. That time seems incredibly convenient for someone plotting a murder at a wedding ceremony with lots of witnesses. Nurses continued coming in and out, checking my vitals and adjusting the IV, while Blake examined test findings on his iPad with a concerned expression that made my stomach plummet. He ultimately informed me that my mercury levels were alarmingly high, far exceeding what they would ordinarily see in industrial accidents, proving that my fiancé had been administering enormous quantities. The compilation treatment burned my veins and made me nauseous, But Blake said that indicated it was working, removing the mercury from my organs, where it had been piling up for months. My parents arrived with my aunt, who immediately began asking Blake about treatment methods and recovery times in medical language that I didn't understand. The door opened, and a lady in a dark suit entered, carrying a state police badge, and introduced herself as Detective Kara Holt, who was taking over the case due to a conflict of interest with the local police chief. She took out a notebook and began writing down what Blake told her about my mercury levels, while my mother continued caressing my arm as if she wanted to ensure I was still present. My aunt was asking Blake about something called chelation cycles and how long it would take for the shaking to stop, using medical terminology that made my head hurt much more than it already did. Detective Holt stated that with 300 wedding guests as witnesses and all of the physical evidence my brother discovered, my fiancé would not get away with what he did to me. She left to collect evidence, but returned 20 minutes later with plastic bags containing the champagne glass from the wedding and a sample of the smoothie my fiancé had prepared me that morning. The field tests revealed extremely high amounts of mercury in both, enough to kill me if I drank it all, so she sealed everything up for the crime lab. My brother arrived with 2 officers holding his arms, burns on his flesh from the altar fire, and swollen eyes where the best man had hit him. Detective Holt instructed the officers to remove the handcuffs because my brother's actions were clearly protective and had saved my life. So they were releasing him on his own recognizance. He just stood there staring at me with a relieved expression on his face while the nurses drew more blood from my arm for further testing. The results revealed that my mercury levels were significantly higher than expected, nearly fatal. But Blake claimed the interrupted dose indicated that my organs hadn't entirely failed yet. He started me on aggressive chelation therapy, stressing that I'd need repeated rounds for the following 3 months with careful monitoring to ensure the mercury was out of my system. The police chief stormed through the door, demanding to see his nephew. But Detective Holt stood directly in front of him and informed him that he was suspended pending an investigation for obstruction of justice. He began ranting about litigation and how she lacked authority, but she presented documents proving that state police had taken over jurisdiction due to his involvement in covering up an attempted murder. He stormed out, slamming the doors while Detective Holt called for someone to follow him to ensure he did not interfere with the inquiry. A lady called Rachel Monroe from the district attorney's office arrived next, putting up a chair beside my bed to take my statement on everything that had happened over the previous 6 months. She was writing quickly as I described the symptoms I'd been experiencing, the confusion and shaking I assumed were due to wedding stress, and how my fiancé had been so supportive when I was sick. Rachel stated that she was moving forward with charges for attempted murder in the first degree, as well as poisoning and fraud, and that she was certain of obtaining a conviction based on the evidence and witnesses. The wedding photographer then knocked on the door, carrying a bag full of memory cards and stating that he had documented everything on video, from my brother's attack to my fiancé holding the knife to my throat. Detective Holt confiscated the memory cards as evidence, claiming that the footage would be critical in showing the jury exactly what happened and establishing that my brother was trying to save me, not harm anyone. A man in a suit arrived, introduced himself as Victor Shaw, and stated that he was representing my brother and needed to discuss defense strategy for the fire and assault accusations. My brother informed him he didn't want any defense that said he was insane or didn't know what he was doing, since he knew precisely what he was doing and would do it again to save me. Given the imminent threat to my life, Victor continued to push the temporary insanity or necessity defense. But my brother shook his head and said he'd sooner go to jail than apologize for stopping a murder. Blake returned with more test results, this time from hair samples gathered, and his expression was dismal as he showed us the charts. The mercury levels in my hair dated back 6 months, beginning small and then increasing, demonstrating that my fiancé had been systematically poisoning me, as my brother had claimed. The timetable corresponded exactly with the notebook my brother discovered, demonstrating how my fiancé gradually increased the doses to avoid rapid death, which would appear suspicious. Each sample revealed increased quantities, along with notes on which portions of hair belonged to which months, resulting in a perfect record of attempted murder. Blake stated this type of evidence was uncommon because most poisoning victims do not live long enough for testing, but my brother's intervention saved not just my life, but also the proof. My hands shook even more as I realized that the man I was about to marry had been slowly killing me for half a year, calculating doses and watching me get sicker while appearing to care. Detective Holt photographed all of the test findings and stated, "This evidence, combined with the journal, would make it impossible for my fiancé to claim innocence or accident. She was putting together a case that would land him in prison for decades, if not life, and she guaranteed me he'd never be able to harm me or anybody else again." The next morning, Detective Holt called to say they had arrested the pharmacist friend at his workplace, bringing him out in handcuffs as his co-workers looked on in disbelief. She informed me he tried to flee when he saw the authorities approaching, but they apprehended him in the parking lot, and he was now in jail, with a lawyer urging him not to say anything. The cops had tracked down all of the cryptocurrency transactions my brother discovered, as well as hundreds of text exchanges between him and my fiancée discussing specific doses and how to make it appear natural. 2 days later, my fiancé was legally charged with attempted murder in the first degree, as well as poisoning, fraud and assault, with a deadly weapon for holding the knife to my throat. His lawyer attempted to secure bail, but the court looked at the evidence and concluded, no way. Not with him being a flight risk and the danger he posed to me. The courthouse was packed with media and wedding guests, and my fiancé sat there in his orange jumpsuit, charred hands still bandaged, glaring at me as if this was my fault. After 5 days in the hospital, they finally let me go home, but I had to return every day for additional chelation treatments, which made me feel ill and weak. My hands wouldn't stop trembling, and I kept discovering clumps of hair in the shower drain. But the doctor suggested the symptoms would improve with time and treatment. While I was packing up my hospital room, the insurance company called to inform me that the $3 million policy was void due to the fraud and attempted murder, and that insurance fraud had been added to the allegations against my fiancé. My brother was charged with arson and assault, but Rachel from the district attorney's office recommended reduced charges because he had saved my life. The judge consented to probation and community service instead of jail time, citing my brother's conduct as justified given the circumstances and the urgent threat to my life. That's when the media learned about everything, and our wedding fiasco became front-page news, with reporters camped outside my parents' house and calling everyone we knew for comment. We had to employ a publicist to manage all of the media inquiries and keep them from following me to my medical appointments. The church sent us a bill for $30,000 in fire damage, but they instantly withdrew it after our publicist described the complete story. The priest contacted to apologize for not noticing the indicators of abuse sooner and offered free therapy services if I needed them. 3 separate wedding attendees called Detective Holt, claiming they'd noticed my fiancé acting strangely with my beverages at parties and meals during the previous year. One bridesmaid burst into tears when she revealed she'd observed my symptoms months ago but dismissed them as wedding stress, and she now felt guilty for not speaking out sooner. Detective Holt uncovered my fiancé's laptop, on which he had hundreds of searches for mercury poisoning symptoms and how long until mercury kills during the previous 6 months. He'd also been looking into countries that do not extradite to the United States, bookmarking articles about escaping the country and living under false identities after committing crimes. The bank investigation revealed even worse news. He had taken over $40,000 from my accounts in small quantities that I had never detected since I was too bewildered from the poisoning to examine my statements. He'd also applied for 5 credit cards in my name without my knowledge, accumulating $20,000 in debt and purchasing expensive items he might sell later for cash. Detective Holt stated that each fresh piece of evidence strengthened the case, and that if convicted, he faced a minimum sentence of 25 years. The pharmacist friend's lawyer approached me about a deal, stating his client would testify against my fiancé in exchange for a reduced sentence because he was only an accomplice. Why did the pharmacist buddy believe he could simply walk away from helping poison someone? The fact he tried to flee when cops arrived tells me he recognized how bad this was all along. Rachel stated that they would most likely accept the offer because his evidence would seal the case, despite her desire for both of them to languish in prison for what they had done to me. My parents had to change their phone number because reporters kept calling, and my father installed security cameras when someone attempted to climb over the fence to take photos. The story went widespread online, with people debating whether my brother was a hero or a criminal, while the majority thought he did the right thing, even if his methods were excessive. My fiancé's family tried to see him in jail, but he declined, most likely because he knew they'd find him guilty once they heard all of the evidence. His mother sent me a letter through her lawyer claiming that I had ruined her son's life and destroyed their family, but I threw it away after reading the first sentence. The fire marshal completed his investigation and officially declared the altar fire a legitimate emergency response to prevent a murder in progress. This greatly aided my brother's case because it demonstrated that his actions were necessary and proportionate to the threat, rather than random violence or retaliation. As Detective Holt investigated deeper, more evidence emerged, including receipts for mercury compounds hidden in my fiancé's storage unit, as well as syringes and medical equipment. She also discovered a draft email he never sent explaining his plan to make my death appear to be abrupt organ failure caused by an undiscovered disease, complete with fabricated symptoms he claimed I had. 2 weeks later, the hospital connected me with Algra Scott, a psychotherapist who worked with survivors of murder attempts. She had a small office with lamps everywhere and tissue boxes on every surface, which made obvious after we started chatting. Algra urged me to go over the entire relationship from the beginning, and I started noticing all the red signals I'd overlooked. My fiancé had pressured me to move in together quickly, isolated me from people who didn't like him, and made me feel crazy whenever I questioned anything. She explained how abusers act, how they gradually push boundaries, making you doubt yourself until you can't believe your own thoughts anymore. The poisoning was simply the culmination of months of mental breakdown. While I was in treatment, my fiancé's family sent me a letter through their lawyer that made me feel angry. They were not remorseful for what their son did. They were furious with me for wrecking his life by refusing to assist him pay off his gambling debt. His mother stated that if I had been a better spouse and supported him financially, none of this would have occurred. They truly blamed me for motivating him to attempt to kill me, as if I had driven him to buy mercury and plan my murder for months. The lawyer requested that we meet to explore how I might assist their family in recovering from the harm I had inflicted. I put the letter in the garbage and instructed my lawyer to issue a cease and desist order. 3 weeks after the wedding, Henry Wallace from the fire marshal's office visited my parents' house with his final report. He'd spent hours interviewing witnesses, going over the material my brother had, and reconstructing exactly what happened that day. His formal verdict stated that my brother's acts were a reasonable emergency response to avoid an impending murder. The report expressly stated that, with the police chief refusing to act and the final dose about to be administered, setting fire was the only way to end the ceremony. This was essential for my brother's defense since it proved he wasn't simply some crazy individual attacking at random. Victor Shaw, my brother's lawyer, stated that this report would likely result in the majority of the charges being withdrawn or reduced to nearly nothing. During my next treatment session, Dr. Samuel sat down with my most recent test results, his expression somber. The good news was that the mercury levels were lowering and that most of it will ultimately leave my system, but he added that mercury causes lasting nerve cell damage that cannot be repaired. My hands would most likely have a minor tremor, especially when I was weary or worried. Some cognitive impacts, such as difficulty concentrating or remembering, may also linger. He claimed I was lucky my brother stopped taking it when he did because another few doses would have resulted in irreversible brain damage. The tremble in my hands worsened as he spoke, and I realized I'd be carrying evidence of what my fiancé had done to me for the rest of my life. The grand jury convened a month after the wedding, and Rachel Monroe delivered their findings. Aside from the attempted murder and poisoning accusations, detectives discovered that my fiancé had used my identity to open credit cards and take out loans. He had faked my signature on documents and set up false email accounts in my name to approve transactions. The grand jury indicted him on 15 counts, including attempted murder in the first degree, aggravated assault, identity theft and fraud. His lawyer attempted to negotiate a 15-year plea offer, but Rachel refused anything less than 25. She told me she wanted him locked up until he was too old to harm others. My brother came over one evening when my parents were gone, and we sat on the back porch where we used to play as children. He ultimately told me everything about that night, including how he snuck into the flat and discovered the notebook hidden beneath other books, reading my fiancé's notes about my symptoms worsening, calculating how much more mercury I could take, and preparing how to act when I died. He tried to call me, but my fiancé had blocked his number on my phone without my knowledge. Going to the police chief at 2 a.m. was his final hope for legal assistance. When the chief called my fiancé, rather than arresting him, my brother realized he only had a few hours before I died. He bought the petrol can at an all-night station and spent the drive to the chapel trying to think of an alternative route. He could only think of one way to utterly halt everything: set fire to the altar. We both burst into tears, and I told him that I could never thank him enough for saving my life. 2 months after the wedding, the state police arrested the chief on allegations of obstructing justice and abuse of office. They found phone records indicating that he called my fiancé immediately after my brother presented him with evidence. He'd also destroyed the initial report my brother attempted to make and directed other officers to ignore any calls regarding the incident. His 30-year career was finished, and he faced up to 5 years in prison, though everyone expected him to get less. Watching him in handcuffs on the news seemed like a small measure of justice. I returned to rigorous work after 3 months, but it was more difficult than I had anticipated. The mercury had interfered with my ability to concentrate, and I'd lose track of what I was doing midway through chores. My hands shook as I tried to type, and I had to take breaks every hour because I was so fatigued. My boss was very understanding, allowing me to work from home most days with flexible hours. But sitting at my desk, trying to concentrate on spreadsheets while my hands trembled, I wondered whether I'd ever feel normal again. When confronted with actual prison time, the pharmacist friend who had helped prepare everything went completely insane. His lawyer contacted Rachel and offered to testify against my fiancé in return for a lower sentence. He kept meticulous records of every interaction they had regarding dosing, timing, and how to make it appear natural. My fiancé's text conversations revealed him asking about drug interactions and whether mercury would be detected in a regular autopsy. The pharmacist had even taken notes on my fiancé's intention to inject me with a final concentrated dose during our honeymoon. With his testimony, the case against my fiancé was almost certain to end in conviction. My parents announced their separation the week before the trial was set to begin. The stress of everything had made existing problems impossible to ignore. My mother blamed my father for pressuring me to marry, claiming he ignored her reservations about my fiancé because he wanted me to settle down. My father chastised her for not recognizing the indicators of abuse, claiming that a mother should have noticed her daughter had been poisoned. They'd been fighting non-stop since the wedding and decided they needed space. Watching my family fall apart as a result of my fiancé's actions made me detest him more than the poisoning itself. Detective Holt called me the next morning while I was at another treatment session, her voice strained from what she had just learned. She'd obtained a warrant for my fiancé's credit card information and discovered monthly payments to a storage facility across town that he had rented 3 months before we were engaged. The hazmat team discovered 12 vials of mercury compounds, as well as needles preloaded with various doses and a notebook in which he had written down backup plans in case the wedding poisoning failed. He intended to continue dosing me after we married, making it appear like a chronic condition that would gradually kill me over time, while he played the loyal husband caring for his sick wife. The storage container also had bogus medical paperwork he had made, claiming I had a family history of neurological issues and putting up a scenario for after my death. I threw up when she told me about the mercury-filled children's prescription bottles he planned to hide around our future home to appear like an accidental poisoning if anyone became suspicious. My treatments lasted 6 more months, with me visiting the hospital 3 times a week at first, then twice, and then once for monitoring. Dr. Samuel performed blood tests at each visit, observing my mercury levels gradually fall from the dangerous red zone to yellow, and ultimately into the safe range. Finding 12 vials of mercury in that storage container made me wonder how long my fiancé had been planning this entire thing. Was it truly only for our wedding, or has he done this before? My hair started growing back in patches at first, then more evenly, but it was thinner and had a different texture than previously. The tremors in my hands improved but never totally disappeared, especially when I was fatigued or anxious. Some days were worse than others, with headaches that made me want to stay in bed and confusion that caused me to forget simple things like where I had left my keys. Dr. Samuel told me that I was fortunate to have survived it all, as most people with my levels of exposure would have lifelong kidney damage or worse. The trial date was established for 8 months after the wedding, giving both parties time to prepare and allowing me to heal sufficiently to testify. Jury selection alone took 2 weeks due to the media hype, with potential jurors admitting they had already formed opinions after seeing the wedding video that had been released online. The judge had to summon people from nearby counties to discover anyone who had not heard about the burning altar or the hostage situation. Seeing my fiancé in court for the first time since that day made my entire body shake, and I had to rush to the restroom to throw up before we even began. He had lost weight in jail, and his burns had healed to leave brilliant pink scars on his wrists and arms. But his eyes were cold and calculated, much as when he held the knife to my throat. I testified for 3 days in a row, detailing every sign I'd ignored, every lie I'd believed, and every time I'd trusted him with my life without realizing he was steadily stealing it away. His lawyer attempted to make me appear insane, questioning if I had invented or exaggerated symptoms for attention, but the medical records spoke for themselves. She questioned why I hadn't seen my money vanishing, or my health deteriorating, attempting to make me appear ignorant or reckless. I detailed how the mercury had confused me, how he had convinced me that the symptoms were caused by wedding stress, and how he had isolated me from people who could have detected something was amiss. When I described the moment he seized the knife and pushed it against my throat, several jurors appeared distraught, and one woman had tears streaming down her cheeks. My brother stood up next, still looking terrible about the fire, despite the fact that everyone knew he had saved my life. He burst into tears when the prosecutor showed him the notebook entries in which my fiancé estimated exactly how much mercury would kill me, with notes such, "She's weaker than expected," and "Increase morning dose." The courtroom was dead silent except for my brother sobbing as he read aloud the entry from the night before the wedding that said, "Tomorrow she dies." He testified about finding the evidence, attempting to get help from the police, and making the desperate decision to burn the altar when he realized no one could stop the wedding. Even the court was moved when my brother recalled watching me degenerate for months, noting the indications but not knowing what they meant until it was too late. As part of his plea agreement, the pharmacist testified next, staring at the floor the entire time as he admitted to assisting in my murder plot. He validated every allegation, displaying text messages in which my fiancé inquired about prescription combinations and how to make mercury poisoning appear to be a natural disease. My fiancé gazed at him with absolute contempt throughout the testimony, his hands gripped so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The pharmacist stated that he knew it was wrong but required the money promised by my fiancé and that he had provided the precise substances and dosing regimens. The defense attempted to prove temporary insanity by bringing in an expert who discussed financial hardship and mental breaks. However, their own witness had to admit that the months of planning, comprehensive journal, and backup plans demonstrated clear premeditation and knowledge of right and wrong. The notebook entries were particularly upsetting, as they demonstrated how he had followed my symptoms with scientific precision and altered doses based on my reactions. After 5 days of waiting while the jury debated, they returned with guilty verdicts on all charges. My fiancé did not react at all, instead staring straight ahead as if he had expected it. However, his mother began yelling from the gallery that I had wrecked their family and ruined her son's life. At my sentencing 3 weeks later, I gave my victim impact statement, my voice quivering as I detailed how he had taken away my ability to trust anyone, my health, and my sense of safety in my own house. I informed the court about my nightmares, therapy sessions, and how I couldn't leave my apartment because I was frightened of everyone. The judge listened to everything and sentenced my fiancé to 35 years in prison with no chance of release for 25 years, calling it one of the most calculated and vicious attempted murders he'd seen in his 30 years on the bench. 3 weeks later, the police chief's trial began, and I had to witness him sit there in his dress uniform, attempting to be dignified, as the prosecutor explained how he shielded his nephew despite seeing proof of attempted murder. The chief continued fixing his tie and glancing at the wall behind the judge, as if he couldn't believe what was happening to him after 30 years in law enforcement. His lawyer attempted to argue that he was only protecting family members and had no knowledge of the full scope of the conspiracy, but phone records proved that he called my fiancé within minutes of my brother approaching him with a notebook. The prosecutor produced text conversations, in which the chief instructed his nephew to handle the matter and cautioned him that my brother was making waves, which directly led to my fiancé hastening his plan to kill me that day. When the verdict was guilty of obstruction of justice and abuse of authority, the chief's wife began crying in the gallery, while he sat with his mouth clenched. The judge sentenced him to 2 years in state jail, as well as the permanent loss of his pension and law enforcement certification, saying he had abused the public trust in the worst way possible. The pharmacist's sentence occurred a month later, and he appeared to have aged 10 years since his arrest, his hands shaking as he stood before the judge. He had fully cooperated with prosecutors, and his testimony had been critical in convicting my fiancé, as his lawyer repeatedly emphasized when pleading for leniency. The judge acknowledged his assistance, but stated that supplying poison to kill someone constituted attempted murder regardless of who delivered it. He received a 5-year sentence with the potential of release in 2 years, as well as the permanent loss of his pharmacist license, and an order to pay restitution for all of my medical expenditures, which would most likely bankrupt him. My brother's community service began that spring, and it didn't escape anyone's notice that he had to teach fire safety courses in the same community center where we had taken swimming lessons as children. He turned up every Saturday morning for 6 months straight, teaching folks about controlled burns and emergency procedures while making dark jokes about becoming an expert through first-hand experience. The kids in his classes adored him because he'd play out the demonstrations and make them interesting rather than boring, even if their parents would mutter about him being the guy who set the church on fire. By summer, I'd started attending a crime victim support group that met every Tuesday in the library's basement, sitting in a circle of metal chairs and drinking awful coffee. That's when I met Victor, who was there because his ex-girlfriend attempted to run him over with her car after he broke up with her for stealing from his business. He understood why I startled when people moved too quickly, or why I still checked my food for strange odors, and he never pushed me to talk about topics I wasn't ready to discuss. We began with coffee after meetings, then supper once a week, taking things so slowly that it was 3 months before he even clasped my hand. My parents' divorce papers were filed that fall, and they sat me down together to explain that the trauma had just exposed existing problems, not created new ones. Mom had obviously been unhappy for years, and Dad had been ignoring it, but seeing their daughter nearly die made them realize they were wasting their lives pretending. They were strangely better as friends than they had been as couples, arriving separately to my therapy appointments yet sending each other updates on my progress. The 1-year anniversary of the wedding arrived faster than planned, and I spent the day with my brother at his apartment, both of us avoiding discussing it while watching movies and eating takeout. I gave him the most recent test results from Dr. Samuel, which revealed that my mercury levels had finally returned to normal, and my liver function had nearly fully recovered. He kept a paper with a magnet on his fridge next to his fire safety instructor credential, which he had acquired after fulfilling all of his community service hours. Through this ordeal, we'd grown closer than we'd ever been as children, texting every day and eating supper together twice a week. That winter, the church contacted to inform me that they had finished rebuilding and that the priest wanted to invite me to a blessing ceremony for the newly constructed altar. I thanked them but declined, knowing that I'd never be able to step into that building without smelling gasoline and burning, or witnessing my brother shove my fiancée into the fire. The priest understood and said he'd pray for my continuous healing, which was great because I hadn't been religious since that day. My fiancée's mother wrote a letter through her lawyer, stating that her son wanted to confess and explain his misdeeds, praying for forgiveness before his first parole hearing in 25 years. Victor was at my flat when it arrived, and he snatched it from my hands before I could finish reading the return address, went straight to the kitchen and discarding it unopened. I didn't need to hear what my fiancé had to say, and I wouldn't give him the comfort of believing I cared about his apologies or explanations. Before his parole hearing, his mother wrote to me and asked for forgiveness. That's ironic given that she claimed I ruined her son's life when he was convicted of attempting to murder me with mercury poisoning. 2 years after the wedding, Victor and I were making supper at my apartment when he turned off the stove and got down on one knee in my little kitchen. He didn't have a ring or a speech prepared. He simply stated that he loved me and wanted to spend his life with me if I would let him. There is no pressure or urgency. I said yes since I'd regained trust through treatment and patience, but we both agreed right away that we'd marry at the courthouse with only our immediate family there. My health had mostly recovered by then, but I still experienced tremors in my hands when I was upset, and my hair never came back as thick as it once had. These reminders of what occurred did not define me, but they became part of my tale, battle scars from surviving someone who claimed to love me while slowly poisoning me to death. My brother began giving those fire safety workshops every Tuesday night at the community center, demonstrating correct extinguisher use and evacuation procedures to groups of 20 or 30 individuals who most likely puzzled why the instructor's hands shook when he lit the demonstration fires. The third week, a woman lingered after class to ask him about the scar on his forearm from being caught in burning debris that night, and he told her the entire tale while they stacked chairs and scrubbed the floor. She returned the following week with handmade cookies for the class and stayed to assist cleanup, this time asking about his job as a carpenter and whether he had always been protective of his family. They went for coffee after the 6th session, and within 2 months they were dating, holding hands at family meals and squeezing his fingers whenever the wedding was discussed. I observed them together at Thanksgiving, how she eased his nerves and made him laugh with anecdotes about her kindergarten kids. And I felt true joy seeing him make something positive out of the darkest night of our lives. 3 years after the wedding, I stood in the state capitol with a large folder containing evidence, medical documents, and testimony from dozens of victims who had contacted me after our tale made national headlines. Our district's representative introduced the Protective Partners Act, which requires banks to flag suspicious account activity in joint accounts, insurance companies to notify both parties of new policies worth more than $50,000, and medical professionals to report suspected poisoning in domestic situations. The committee questioned me for 2 hours about detection procedures, warning indicators, and how my situation could have been avoided with sufficient safeguards in place. Victor sat in the gallery, taking notes, while my brother watched from the back row. They were both present for every hearing and revision until the legislation passed with only 3 dissenting votes. The signing ceremony took place on a Tuesday afternoon, and the governor signed his name with 5 separate pens, giving me the first one in a small wooden box that now hangs on our mantel next to our courthouse wedding photo. Victor and I had our daughter 14 months later, named her after my aunt, who had first verified the poison that day, but we simply call her Sophie. She emerged screaming, with thick dark hair and her father's nose, clutching my finger so tightly that the nurse joked she had inherited her uncle's protective instincts. My brother cried when he held her for the first time, whispering promises about keeping her safe that I knew he'd keep because he'd previously demonstrated his loyalty to family. As she grew, we told her more age-appropriate variations of the narrative. Uncle protected Mommy from a bad man, but we preserved the facts until she was old enough to understand without being terrified. My brother took the fire investigator exam 4 years after the wedding, scored in the top 5%, and was recruited by the county right away. He worked 60-hour weeks analyzing burn patterns, accelerant traces, and witness accounts, eventually becoming the go-to person for tricky cases in other departments. His reports were so detailed that prosecutors relished having his cases because convictions were practically inevitable, and he testified with the same zeal he'd displayed at the altar. He discovered his destiny in protecting others in the same way he had protected me, turning his trauma into a purpose that prevented other families from losing everything to arson. 5 years after the wedding, I was getting coffee downtown when someone yelled my name, and I turned to see the best man standing there with his own drink and a look like he'd seen a ghost. He asked if we could sit for a minute and spent 10 minutes apologizing for striking my brother, not recognizing the truth sooner, and being a part of the group who nearly killed me. I told him it wasn't his responsibility because my fiancé had duped everyone, but he shook his head and said he should have recognized the indications, questioned the life insurance, and done something. We didn't exchange numbers or commit to remain in touch, but the chat offered us both the closure we didn't realize we needed. My mother met her second husband at grief counseling, a widower whose wife had died from cancer, not attempted murder disguised as illness. He was compassionate with her guilt for not protecting me, gentle when she awoke screaming from nightmares of the burning altar, and unconcerned when family dinners involved lengthy conversations about the trial or my continuous medical care. Their wedding was small, with just his immediate family in his backyard, a justice of the peace and grocery store cake. But seeing her smile again, without that haunting look in her eyes, helped me recover as well. Sophie's 5th birthday party was held at a park near our house, with 30 children from her preschool running around while parents spoke over juice and pizza. My brother pushed her on the swing, and she screamed with delight. Victor manned the grill and flipped burgers for the adults. And my parents were sitting at a picnic table, peacefully making vacation plans with my mother's new husband. This ordinary occasion with chocolate cake, party games, and kids bickering over toys felt like the greatest win after everything we'd been through. 10 years have passed since that flaming altar and the knife at my throat, and days go by without my thinking about it at all. Too busy with Sophie's school projects, Victor's promotion, my brother's engagement party, and my mother's garden club fundraising. My tremor only appears under high stress. My hair grew back fuller than before thanks to some costly procedures, and the scar on my throat disappeared to a faint white line that most people don't see. My life is filled of individuals who genuinely want me to live and be happy, which is all I've ever wanted. Thank you for staying around with me and meandering through those memories. Parents secretly used $15,500 on my credit card for my sister's Europe trip. I reported them, hired a lawyer, and turned their scheme upside down. I am Lucas, a 28-year-old man, and my younger sister Lily, a 22-year-old female, recently graduated from college. Our parents have always had an odd approach to parenting, but this newest act has made me enraged. To provide some context, I've always been the responsible member of the family. I worked hard in school, received scholarships, and found a nice career in finance right out of college. I've been financially independent since I was 22, and I'm pleased of my accomplishments. Lily, on the other hand, has always been the baby in the family. Don't get me wrong, I adore my sister, but she's clearly been coddled by our parents. Growing up, it was obvious that Lily was the favorite. She was given the latest clothes and gadgets and was never forced to work part-time or help with home duties. I tried not to let it affect me too much, focused instead on my own aspirations and future, but occasionally the partiality was difficult to ignore. I recall one specific instance when I was 16 and Lily was 10. I'd been saving for months to buy a new gaming console. When I finally had enough money, I joyfully informed my parents that I was going to the store to buy it. To my surprise, they answered, "Oh, we already bought one for Lily last week. You can share hers." I was upset, but I swallowed my disappointment and tried to be pleased for my sister. Let's fast forward to the present. Lily recently finished with a communications degree. I am truly proud of her. She worked hard and earned the right to celebrate her accomplishment. I also sent her a wonderful graduation gift. A new laptop she had been wanting. My mom called me last week. She was overjoyed, telling me how they had prepared the ideal graduation gift for Lily, a month-long vacation of Europe. I was overjoyed for Lily, believing it was a lovely gift from our parents, but then the bombshell dropped. "We used your credit card to book it all," my mother explained nonchalantly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "We'll pay you back, of course, but we needed the points from your card to upgrade some of the flights and hotels." I was speechless. I couldn't believe what I heard. When I finally recovered my voice, I inquired about the amount they had spent. The response made me feel as if I had been punched in the gut. $15,500. $15,500 was charged to my credit card without my knowledge or consent. Mom, I began, trying to keep my voice steady. You can't just use my credit card without asking me. That's illegal, and $15,500 is a lot of money. She dismissed my concerns. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Lucas. It's for your sister's graduation. We're family, and family helps each other out. Besides, we're good for it. We'll pay you back eventually. Eventually? What exactly did that mean? And since when has $15,500 been considered casual? I tried to explain to my mother why this was such a significant deal, the effect on my credit score, the possibility that I may need the credit limit for an emergency, and the sheer breach of trust. But she didn't hear it. You've always been so selfish, she replied, her voice becoming cold. Can't you just be happy for your sister? This is her big moment, and you're trying to ruin it with your penny-pinching ways. I couldn't believe what I heard. I was considered selfish for being concerned about a $15,500 unauthorized charge on my credit card. I hung off the phone feeling angry, wounded, and incredulous. Over the next few days I tried to talk to my father, hoping he'd be more reasonable, but he agreed with my mother, telling me I was overreacting and that I should be more supportive of my sister. Lily, for her part, appeared clueless to the entire event. When I tried to talk to her about it, she just gushed about how happy she was for the trip and thanked me for helping with her graduation gift. I felt crazy. Was I truly the unreasonable one here? I decided to phone the credit card company to dispute the charges, but to my astonishment, I learned that my parents had used my card information, which they kept in case of an emergency, to book everything online. The credit card company stated that because I had provided them my information, it was not deemed fraud. Now I'm faced with a $15,500 bill, a maxed-out credit card, and a family who thinks I'm greedy for refusing to pay my sister's lavish vacation. I am hurt, furious, and feel betrayed by those who are supposed to love and support me. I do not know what to do. Part of me wants to cancel the entire vacation, but I know it would cause a major schism in our family. Another part of me wants to just pay it off to avoid the fuss, but $15,500 is a large sum of money, and the principle of the situation bothers me. Plus, I'm concerned that if I let this go, it may set a precedent for future financial exploitation. Am I overreacting? Should I just suck it up and pay for my sister's vacation, or should I remain firm, even if it means risking my connection with my family? I'm feeling lost and could use some advice. Update 1. I appreciate everyone's encouraging remarks and advice. I was stunned by the huge response to my post. Reading through your comments helped me realize that I wasn't insane for feeling violated and outraged over this scenario. I took your counsel and decided to take action. First, I called my credit card company again to escalate the situation. I described the scenario in detail, emphasizing that, while my parents had my card information for emergencies, I had never allowed this exact use. After some back and forth, they decided to look into the charges as possible fraud. Next, I sent a group text to my parents and Lily, requesting a Zoom call to discuss the problem. I wanted to give them the opportunity to set things right before taking more serious actions. The call was intense. I began by calmly describing why their actions were unacceptable. The legal consequences, the violation of trust, and the financial strain it placed on me. I informed them that I had reported the transactions as fraudulent and that they needed to cancel the trip immediately. My parents' reaction did not meet my expectations. They were furious, accusing me of being dramatic and attempting to derail Lily's graduation party. My mom went so far as to say, "We raised you, clothed you, and put a roof over your head. The least you could do is help give your sister the trip of a lifetime." I took a deep breath before responding. You chose to have children. Providing for us was your responsibility as parents. It doesn't mean you get to commit credit card fraud in my name. And Lily, who had remained calm until now, burst into sobs. "I can't believe you're trying to ruin my graduation gift," she said. "You've always been jealous of me. Why can't you be happy for me for once?" Her comments hurt, but they also bolstered my determination. I saw that this pattern of entitlement and favoritism was pervasive, and it was necessary to establish some clear boundaries. "Lily," I began, trying to keep my voice calm but firm. "I'm happy for you. I'm proud of your graduation. But this trip was booked illegally using my money without my permission. It's not a gift from me, and it's not okay." My father, who had been unusually silent, eventually spoke up. "Son, we didn't think it was such a big deal. We've always had access to your card for emergencies. We just thought, as family, it would be okay this one time." I couldn't believe what I heard. "Dad, $15,500 is not a small amount, and this was not an emergency. You can't just decide to spend my money without asking me. The call concluded with my parents outraged, Lily in tears, and me exhausted yet determined. They declined to cancel the trip, claiming that I was overreacting and that they would reimburse me. Soon after the call, I took the next move. I contacted a lawyer buddy of mine and discussed the circumstances. He informed me that what my parents did was illegal, and that if I chose to take legal action, I would have valid reasons. I also went to the police station and reported the unauthorized usage of my credit card. The officer I dealt with was compassionate and took down all the information. He advised me that pressing charges would most certainly cause a significant schism in my family, but he also informed me that I was perfectly within my rights to do so. I'm still torn about what to do next. On the one hand, I adore my family, and the thought of pursuing legal action against them makes me sick. On the other hand, their behavior is inappropriate, and I'm concerned that if I don't take a firm stance now, this will happen again in the future. For the time being, I've opted to await the results of the credit card company's investigation. I have also frozen my credit to prevent further fraudulent usage of my information. This entire experience has made me understand that I need to set tighter boundaries with my family. I've always tried to be the peacekeeper, to smooth things over and make everyone happy, but in doing so, I've let myself be taken advantage of numerous times. I am hurt and outraged, but I also feel a strange sense of empowerment. For the first time, I'm standing up for myself and saying, no. This is not okay. It's unsettling and frightening, but it also feels important. Thank you all again for your encouragement and wisdom. I'll update again if I receive more information about the credit card investigation, or if anything else happens with my family. Update 2. It's been several weeks since my last update, and a lot has happened. I'd like to thank everyone again for their help and advice. Your remarks have given me strength at this tough time. First, good news. The credit card company's probe ended in my favor. They agreed that the accusations were improper and reversed them. It's a big relief to have the $15,500 burden removed off my shoulders. Now for the familial fallout. When my parents and Lily discovered that the vacation had been canceled owing to a credit card chargeback, all hell broke loose. My phone was full of angry calls and texts. My mother left a particularly harsh voicemail, calling me a greedy, ungrateful son who had ruined Lily's life. Lily resorted to social media, sharing an emotional video describing how her spiteful brother had ruined her ideal graduation trip. Some of our shared acquaintances and extended family members began to contact me, asking why I was treating my younger sister so badly. The situation was spiraling out of control, and I realized I needed to correct the record. I made a calm, factual post detailing what had actually happened, how my card had been used without my consent, and how I had attempted to handle the situation with my family before contacting the credit card company. The response to my post was varied. Some others were supportive, expressing surprise at my parents' behavior. Others still believed I should have just taken one for the team and let Lily have her trip. It was surprising to learn how many people believed it was acceptable to conduct fraud as long as it was for family. A few days after my post, I got a surprise call from my aunt, my mother's sister. She was empathetic to my predicament and told me about some family history that I didn't know. Apparently, my mother had a history of financial carelessness and had previously taken advantage of family members. My aunt encouraged me to hold firm and offered her support. This chat with my aunt made me realize that the problem was deeper than simply this one episode. It was a pattern of behavior that had been tolerated and justified for years. I understood then that I needed to set clear boundaries, not just for myself, but also to halt the pattern of financial abuse. I decided to take a major step. I informed my parents that I would be in no communication with them for the foreseeable future. I mentioned that I needed time to comprehend what had transpired and could not trust them just now. I also informed Lily that, while I loved her and was pleased of her accomplishments, I wanted some space from her as well. Their reactions were unsurprisingly negative. My parents accused me of pulling the family apart. Lily screamed, accusing me of punishing her for something she didn't do. It was difficult, but I stood by my decision. In the midst of all this familial dysfunction, I've been working on safeguarding myself against future financial exploitation. I changed all of my passwords, closed the credit card that my parents had access to, and opened a new one with a different bank. I've also started seeing a therapist to work through my emotions about the situation and establish healthier limits. One unexpected positive result of this journey has been a closer relationship with my aunt and a couple of cousins who have reached out to provide assistance. It's comforting to know that not everyone in my family feels what my parents did was acceptable. Regarding Lily's graduation vacation, I heard through the family grapevine that my parents are still considering about sending her somewhere. Part of me feels sorry for her losing out on the Europe trip, but I keep reminding myself that it was not my obligation to provide it for her. I am still dealing with thoughts of guilt and mistrust. There are times when I question if I did the right thing, or if I was too harsh. But then I recall how violated I felt when I learned what they had done, and I know I made the correct decision by sticking up for myself. This incident was a tough wake-up call, but it also taught me valuable lessons about self-respect and setting limits. I'm learning that it's alright to say no, even to family, and that love should not have a price. Thank you again for your support. I'll keep you updated if there are any important developments, but for the time being, I'm focusing on healing and moving forward. Post 3. It's been approximately 2 months since my last post, and I'd want to share some developments with you all. Your ongoing support and advice have been vital during this difficult time. First, I'll address the most important issue, the legal status. After careful study and consulting with my lawyer, I decided not to file charges against my parents. This was not an easy decision, and I know many of you advised me to pursue legal action. However, my lawyer said that because the credit card company had reversed the charges, prosecuting a criminal case would be hard and potentially costly, with no assurance of success. Instead, we wrote my parents a formal cease and desist letter, informing them that any future attempts to use my financial information would result in instant legal action. Now for the family situation. My no-contact period with my parents and Lily has been both difficult and educational. It's given me time to ponder on our family relationships and improve myself. I've been going to therapy on a regular basis, which has been quite beneficial in helping me process my feelings and set healthier limits. About a month into the no-contact period, I got an unexpected email from Lily. Compared to her prior crying claims, this email was rather sophisticated. She wrote that she had thought a lot about our parents' actions and realized how wrong they were. She apologized for her first reaction and for not advocating for me. Lily said that she had always known about the favoritism but had been too afraid and comfortable to question it. I was cautiously optimistic about Lily's email but decided to take it slowly. We've had a few phone talks since then, and I can tell she truly wants to understand my point of view. She revealed some of her own experiences with our parents' financial irresponsibility, which she had previously kept to herself. The aborted trip to Europe appears to have served as a wake-up call for her as well. My parents have been less inclined to accept responsibility. They've made multiple attempts to reach me, including angry voicemails and guilt-tripping emails. My mother even showed up at my place unexpectedly one day, causing quite a ruckus in the hallway. I held firm and refused to engage, which was difficult but important. The situation with extended family members has been mixed. Some family have been helpful, particularly my aunt, who first contacted out. She has become an important ally and source of support. Others, however, continue to encourage me to reconcile with my parents, citing the "but their family" argument. I've had to distance myself from some of these family for my own mental health. On a good side, this predicament has resulted in some unanticipated personal development. With the time and energy I used to devote to dealing with my family's problems, I've been able to concentrate more on my own life and ambitions. I've started a new passion, photography, and I'm spending more time with pals that respect my boundaries. I've also made important financial decisions. I've upped my payments to retirement accounts and begun to construct a more substantial emergency fund. This entire experience has truly emphasized the significance of financial independence and stability. Last week, I had an especially satisfying moment. I was promoted at work, which came with a big wage increase. Previously, I might have felt forced to share this news and the financial rewards with my family. This time, I celebrated quietly with a few close friends, pleased of my successes but free of shame or obligation to share. Regarding Lily's graduation vacation, my aunt informed me that our parents decided to send her on a 2-week tour of California. Lily seemed to appreciate it. Looking ahead, I am cautiously optimistic. I've chosen to extend my no-contact period with my parents for at least 3 more months. I need more time to recuperate and to determine whether they are capable of respecting my boundaries. I'm willing to gradually re-establish our relationship with Lily, but I'm treading carefully and setting firm boundaries. This event taught me a lot about setting boundaries, advocating for myself, and understanding the actual meaning of family. I've understood that family is more than just blood links. It's about mutual respect, support, and love. The friends and relatives who have supported me during this ordeal have taught me what true family is like. I also learned an important lesson about financial freedom. I've always been good with money, but this situation has made me even more attentive. I've increased security measures on all of my accounts and grown more forceful about protecting my financial information, even from family members. There have been moments of doubt and sadness, particularly when I have missed family gatherings due to the no-contact policy. Mother's Day was very painful, but I remind myself that this separation is essential for my mental health and personal development. One unanticipated result of this scenario is that I've become a resource for friends who are coping with financial problems in their own families. Several people have contacted me for guidance on setting boundaries and dealing with financially irresponsible family members. It is great to be able to assist others in similar situations. My aunt informed me that my parents are experiencing financial difficulties. Apparently, they had planned to use my credit for more than simply Lily's vacation. This has resulted in some arguments between them, with my father blaming my mother for going too far with the credit card fraud. Part of me feels awful knowing they're struggling financially, but I remind myself that it's not my obligation to correct their poor financial decisions. Lily has provided some insight into our parents' reactions to all of this. She claims they're still not sure why I responded so strongly. They regard their acts as a natural part of being a family and don't understand why I'm making such a big deal about it. This lack of understanding is frustrating, but it also confirms that I made the proper decision to distance myself. I've been reflecting a lot about my upbringing and early adulthood, noticing patterns of financial and emotional exploitation that I had internalized. It's been both heartbreaking and liberating. I'm learning to validate my own emotions and experiences without needing permission from my parents. In my personal life, I've begun dating again. I was scared to become involved with anyone while dealing with so much family dysfunction, but I recently met someone who has been quite sympathetic of my position. It's early days, but it feels fantastic to be connecting with someone that respects my boundaries and principles. I'm also considering making some major life adjustments. I've always wanted to get a master's degree, but I put it off because I was concerned about how it would affect my capacity to support my family financially. Now I'm actively researching programs and contemplating taking the plunge. It is empowered to make decisions based simply on what is best for me and my future. As I write this report, I am impressed by how much has changed in only a few months. The initial shock and indignation have subsided, replaced by a sense of quiet determination. I am no longer simply responding to my family's activities. I'm actively building the life I desire for myself. To those of you who are coping with similar family troubles, I want to express that it will get better. Setting boundaries is difficult, and there may be reaction. But stay strong. You have the right to safeguard yourself, your wealth, and your mental health. Thank you all for your continued support throughout this adventure. Your counsel and encouragement have been lifelines. I am not sure what the future holds for my relationship with my parents and sister, but I am confident that whatever happens, I will be fine. I'm stronger, more confident in myself, and prepared to face whatever comes next. I will provide an update if there are any important developments, but for the time being, I am focused on moving forward and creating the life I want, surrounded by people who respect and support me. Here's to new beginnings and hard-gained wisdom. Update 4. It's been 6 months since my previous update, and I felt it was time to share the most recent developments with everyone who has been so supportive along this trip. First, the major news. I've been accepted to a master's program at a city around 3 hours from where I now live. It's a 2-year financial technology curriculum that precisely coincides with my professional ambitions. I start this fall, and I'm both eager and scared about this new chapter in my life. The decision to seek this degree was not simple. It entails leaving my work, relocating to a new city, and taking out some student debts. However, it also entails investing in myself and my future in ways I've always wanted to. I realized I had been holding myself back by constantly considering how my decisions would affect my family. Now I'm making decisions based on what's best for me, which feels extremely liberated. My family situation has taken unexpected turns. My no-contact period with my parents officially ended 2 months ago. I consented to participate in a family therapy session led by a professional therapist. It was intense. My parents responded defensively, arguing that they had done nothing wrong. However, as the discussion went, several shocking truths emerged. It turned out that my father had lost a considerable amount of money in a disastrous venture, which he had kept from everyone, including my mother. They'd been discreetly struggling financially for months and saw my credit card as a method to keep up appearances. This discovery caused a lot of tears and recriminations. My mother felt betrayed by my father's secrecy. My father felt ashamed of his terrible financial judgments. And both of them seemed to realize the significance of what they had done to me. While this explanation does not justify their actions, it does help me understand the desperation that drove their awful decisions. The therapist assisted us in working through some of these difficulties, and for the first time, I received genuine apologies from both of my parents. We agreed to continue family therapy sessions on a monthly basis. It's a lengthy process, and I'm still setting tough boundaries, but I'm cautiously optimistic about repairing our connection on better terms. Lily has continued to develop and mature. She has taken steps to achieve financial independence, such as taking a full-time job and moving into her own apartment. We've started communicating more frequently, and I feel like I'm getting to know my sister as an adult for the first time. She's even asked for budgeting and saving tips, which feels like a big step forward in our relationship. On a personal level, the relationship I highlighted in my previous report has developed into something wonderful. Ingrid has been really supportive of my desire to return to school, despite the fact that it will need us to travel large distances for some time. Her personal experiences with creating boundaries with family have made her an invaluable source of support and understanding. Financially, I'm doing well. The promotion I obtained enabled me to save a large amount of money for my transfer and to help offset some of the expenditures of graduate studies. I've also gotten much more forceful in protecting my financial information. I recently had to turn down an attempt by a distant relative to persuade me to co-sign a loan. It was not easy, but I held firm, and it felt good to establish my boundaries. As I prepare for this new chapter in my life, I've been thinking about how much has changed since that first shocking phone call from my mother about the credit card charges. The pain and rage I felt back then have mostly vanished, giving way to a sense of empowerment and self-assurance I had no idea I had. I've learned a lot from this experience. I've learned the value of establishing and keeping boundaries, especially with family. I've realized that it's acceptable to prioritize my own well-being and future, and I've learned that true family, whether blood or choice, encourages growth and respects personal limits. Thank you to everyone who has followed my story and contributed support and advice along the way. During some of the most trying times, your words have provided me with strength and insight. Those going through comparable family issues should know that they can come out stronger and wiser. As I pack my flat and prepare for this new journey, I experience a surge of excitement and possibilities that I haven't felt in years. I am proud of how far I have come, and I am excited about what the future holds. I may not be able to update for a long due to my upcoming move and start of school, but I will always be grateful for the support I've received here. TH570. Mom forced me to write, "I am too stupid to think for myself," 10,000 times, then told everyone we'd died in a fire. But the truth was worse. My mother handed each of her children a unique identity at birth from which we could never escape. Clara was the intelligent one. Mia was the attractive one. Daniel was the stronger one. And I was the dumb one. Mom didn't just label us, she punished us anytime we excelled in the wrong things. She referred to it as preserving the family ecosystem. The allocations were determined within minutes of our births based on Mom's initial thoughts. Clara came forth quiet and watchful, so Mom considered her the smartest one. Mia had delicate features even as a newborn, which made her attractive. Daniel was a huge infant who cried loudly, which made him stronger. I was born last and smallest, struggling to breathe, and Mom assumed I was dumb. She had listed these positions on our birth certificates as medical conditions. Dad left when he understood how serious she was about this. He couldn't bear to witness what she was doing to us. Mom regarded his departure as confirmation that her system operated better without him. When Clara struggled with a math problem, Mom would solve it for her, then hit me if I tried to assist because dumb children do not comprehend mathematics. When I got taller than Mia, Mom forced me to slouch repeatedly until my spine visibly curled so the dumb one couldn't be tall either. She kicked me out of school after 3rd grade, saying I was too stupid to study. But Mom had actually frightened when I began reading above grade level. Daniel was not permitted to cry, even if he had broken bones, because the strong one cannot feel pain. When Mia attained average teenage weight, Mom put her on rigorous diets that caused her to faint on a daily basis, because the pretty one had to stay skinny at all costs. Mom deteriorated as we grew older and began displaying talents that did not match our labels. She gave Mia medication that caused her hair to fall out whenever she demonstrated athletic ability, because lovely females don't sweat. She forced Daniel to lift weights from the age of 6 until his joints were almost completely ruined, ensuring that he would need a cane by the age of 20. When Clara demonstrated creative talent, Mom destroyed her paintings in front of her. But I received it worse since brains was more difficult to destroy than beauty or muscle. Mom forced me to take drugs that made me dizzy and disoriented, claiming they were for my severe learning problem, which I didn't have. My siblings and I sought to protect each other during this nightmare. Clara would covertly educate me from her textbooks after midnight, risking Mom's wrath if we were detected. Mia stole my medicines and replaced them with vitamins whenever she could. Daniel would pretend to chase me away from his weights while actually helping me exercise. We devised an entire hidden language to speak without Mom noticing. We were prisoners together, each struggling with our own curse while attempting to assist the others with theirs. My 15th birthday marked our first escape attempt. Daniel had gathered money from odd jobs, and we intended to flee together, but Mom had installed trackers on our phones and apprehended us at the train station. Her penalty was harsh. Daniel had to lift 100-pound sacks around till his back gave out. Clara had to calculate problems for 16 hours straight before collapsing. Mia spent days staring in mirrors, listing her flaws. And I had to write, "I am too stupid to think for myself," 10,000 times. After that, she took us to this remote farmhouse and told everyone we had died in a fire. 3 years later, I discovered online classes and began surreptitiously studying while Mom assumed I was looking at picture books. My siblings made these elaborate distractions so that I might learn. Clara would fabricate academic issues that required Mom's complete attention. Mia would experience beauty emergencies that took hours to resolve. Daniel would pretend to harm himself in ways that demanded Mom's constant attention. Thanks to them, I completed my GED and applied to colleges using the library's computer. When my acceptance letter from the state institution arrived at our P.O. box, Daniel grabbed it, and we all grieved in the barn. We plotted my escape for months. Clara pretended to have a seizure because her great mind was overworked the night I left, while Mia shattered a mirror and threatened to damage her face. During the hubbub, Daniel snuck me out in his pickup and took me to campus. For one beautiful week, I lived in a dorm and attended school like a regular person. I chose my own clothes, talked in class, and acquired friends who recognized me as just. Then Mom called. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" she asked, unusually calm. "The school inquired about your medical records. I've already withdrawn you. Daniel is bringing you home." I whirled around to find Daniel in my doorway, feeling ill with shame. Behind him, Mom was holding a medical bag. "I'm sorry," he muttered. She threatened to blind Mia and Clara's hands. Mom grinned as she prepared a syringe. "You've upset the whole ecosystem by trying to be smart," she said, walking toward me. "We need to fix that overactive brain permanently. Dr. Whitaker is meeting us at the house. He does special labities that target specific parts of the brain." As Daniel grabbed my arms and Mom raised the needle, she said the words that still haunt me. "Don't worry, sweetie. You won't remember wanting to be anything but dumb once we've finished scooping out the problem parts." The needle drew closer to my skin, and I watched the clear liquid within as Daniel tightened his grip on both of my arms. My heart raced so hard that I felt it would burst as the metal point touched my arm. That's when the banging began on my dorm door, loud enough to shake the entire structure. Mom yanked the needle back and stuffed it into her medical bag just as the door swung open. Tessa Grant, a campus security officer, raced in with her hand on her radio, staring at the three of us locked in strange poses. Daniel still had my arms held behind me, and Mom was zipping her suitcase closed while attempting to appear normal. Grant stepped between us, removing Daniel's hands from mine before leading me behind her to the door. My entire body trembled so violently that I could scarcely stand, and my teeth chattered as if I were frozen. Mom began speaking in her calm medical voice about how concerned she was about my mental health and how I needed assistance. She claimed I had been having episodes and making up stories about the family. Grant stared at the red marks on my arms where Daniel had grabbed me, then at Mom's medical bag on my desk. I attempted to speak, but the shaking caused my voice to crack and sound strange. Grant inquired what was in the bag, and I managed to answer syringe between chatters. Mom said it was merely medication for my condition, but Grant didn't buy it. She called for backup on her radio and blocked the entryway, preventing anyone from leaving. Mom tried to push past her, but Grant raised her hand and stated everyone had to keep still until this was addressed. Grant summoned 2 additional security guards and instructed them to keep an eye on Mom and Daniel while she spoke with me. I told her about the needle and the lobotomy Mom had threatened, my words coming out jumbled and scared. Grant's expression changed from concerned to scared as she phoned for an ambulance on her radio. Mom was attempting to interrupt and explain, but Grant begged her to stay quiet. The ambulance arrived in what seemed like an eternity, but it was really only 10 minutes. The EMTs examined me and discovered the small red mark where the needle had touched my skin. They carried me into the ambulance and Grant informed Mom and Daniel that they would need to come to the station for interrogation. At the emergency room, Dr. Helena Sato evaluated the injection site and photographed it with a special camera. She measured the red lines on my arms and logged everything onto her computer. She ordered blood testing right away to see if any drugs had entered my system. The nurse drew what seemed like 20 tubes of blood while Dr. Sato questioned me about what had transpired. I told her about the medicines Mom had made me take for years, which made me dizzy and disoriented. Dr. Sato's face became increasingly concerned as I recounted the fictitious learning problem. She requested additional testing, including hair samples, which could reveal drug exposure dating back months. The nurse cut little bits of my hair from various locations on my head and placed them in evidence containers. They also made me pee in a cup and take swabs from my mouth. Dr. Sato stated that they will perform every conceivable test to determine what mom had been giving me. I spent the entire night in the hospital undergoing tests and scans. They performed a brain scan to look for any effects from the long-term drugging. The next morning, a woman named Amelia Cross from the university came to see me. She introduced herself as a case manager and sat down with a large packet of paperwork. She stated that the registration office had discovered the documents mom had used to withdraw me from school. The papers claimed that I had serious cognitive impairment and could not operate in an academic environment. Amelia stated that the documents were plainly falsified, despite the fact that I had been attending classes for a week without issue. She helped me fill out a FERPA block, which prevented mom from accessing any of my school records. We spent an hour reviewing several forms for campus safety measures. Amelia began the paperwork for a no-contact order, which would bar mom from campus. She said it would take a few days to process, but campus security already had mom's photo. I grabbed my phone to send my siblings our old code word, which meant, "Are you okay?" Mia responded that mom was home and screaming at everyone about how I had wrecked everything. She stated mom was on the phone with lawyers, attempting to file for guardianship over me. Mom claimed I was mentally incompetent and needed someone to make decisions for me. Mia informed me that mom had already called 3 different physicians to ask them to sign documents regarding my alleged handicap. There's something extremely disconcerting about this mother's meticulous control system, which assigns duties from birth based on initial impressions. I'm curious why she is so wedded to these rigid classifications that she would drug and physically hurt her own children. Amelia called legal aid, and within an hour, an attorney named Rachel Monroe arrived. She was young, but she seemed quite sharp and took notes on everything I told her. She told we had to document everything to fight the guardianship attempt. She asked me to write out whatever I could remember about the medications and the abuse. We made lists of all the instances mom had punished us for excelling at the wrong things. Rachel stated that my college acceptance and grades would help indicate that I was not mentally challenged. Detective Harper Quinn arrived that afternoon to collect my official statement regarding what occurred in the dorm. She asked me to go over everything step by step as she filmed it on a little gadget. She inquired about the long-term pattern of maltreatment, and I explained the roles mom assigned us. She wanted to know whether I had any proof of what mom had been doing to us. I remembered the birth certificates Daniel described earlier, where mom had inscribed our allocated duties. Detective Quinn jotted it down and said she'd look into getting copies from the county record office. I spent the next 2 days going through everything I had, pulling out my GED certificate from the folder I'd hidden in the barn, printing out my college acceptance letter from the library computer, and screenshotting every text message my siblings had sent me about what mom was doing to us over the years. Rachel sat with me in the hospital cafeteria, going through everything, making copies and putting everything into folders designated educational competency, pattern of maltreatment, and medical proof. She continued shaking her head at some of the messages, especially when Mia described being forced to throw up after eating normal meals, or Clara talked about having to pretend she didn't comprehend basic ideas in front of mom. The financial aid office called while we were working, and the woman on the phone sounded perplexed when she stated that my financing had been frozen because mom had contacted them, claiming I was psychologically unable to manage money. Amelia met us there the next morning, and we waited in those terrible plastic chairs as she completed the override paperwork, explained the issue to the financial aid director, and showed him the police report from the dorm incident. He stated that it would take weeks to process, but promised to expedite it due to the circumstances. Mom began sending emails to my school account that afternoon, long meandering rants about how I was damaging the family ecology and how the foolish one accepting their place was critical for everyone's well-being. She talked on how Clara's knowledge would suffer without contrast, how Mia's beauty would be meaningless if everyone was equal, and how Daniel's strength stemmed from defending the weak. Rachel instructed me to keep every email but not respond, claiming that these texts were ideal evidence of mom's abusive mindset and would aid our case. I moved them all to a separate folder and avoided reading them too attentively since they made my hands quiver. Dr. Sato called 3 days later with the blood test results, her voice careful as she explained that they'd discovered traces of sedatives in my system consistent with long-term exposure. Specifically, a type commonly used to treat severe anxiety, but which would cause confusion and cognitive impairment in someone who didn't need them. She was ordering hair follicle testing, which could reveal drug exposure dating back months or perhaps years, and she claimed this information could be critical in pursuing criminal charges against mom for poisoning or assault. That following evening, Daniel called me sobbing so hard that I couldn't understand him at first. He kept saying he was sorry until finally admitting that Mom was forcing him to pick between helping her bring me home and allowing her to damage Mia and Clara much more than before. His voice trembled as he told me she had hired some guy who discovers people who don't want to be found, and that this person was already tracking my location via phone, computer, or something. I could hear Mom in the background instructing him to quit being weak and that a strong person does not cry over necessary discipline. Detective Quinn set up a meeting for the next day to discuss obtaining a restraining order against Mom, explaining that between the assault attempt in my dorm, the stalking behavior with the tracker she'd mentioned discovering, and the documented pattern of abuse we were establishing, we should have enough for at least a temporary protective order. We met at the police station, where she asked me to fill out additional documents outlining every incident of Mom hurting, threatening, or controlling my life. 3 days later, we went to court for the temporary restraining order hearing. And of course, Mom arrived looking nicely put together in a blue suit with her hair tied back, telling the judge in a calm, logical tone that I was deluded and had always had mental difficulties that required continual monitoring. But then the judge looked at the medical evidence Dr. Sato had given over, read through the letters Mom had written me about the ecosystem, and saw the images Officer Grant had taken of the marks on my arms from the dorm incident, and his expression hardened. He issued a temporary restraining order and set up a hearing for a permanent one, telling Mom that any contact with me would result in arrest. Within hours after leaving the courthouse, Mom began contacting me through other people, cousins I hadn't heard from in years suddenly messaging me about how I was tearing Mom's heart, and old family friends calling the dorm phone to tell me I was selfish and destroying my family. Rachel documented every single contact as a violation of the spirit, if not the law, of the restraining order, bolstering our argument that Mom couldn't respect boundaries even with legal ramifications. Then someone posted my dorm address on a forum about problem children who abandon their families, alleging I was a dangerous, mentally sick person who had abandoned my poor mother to care for my brothers alone after years of sacrifice. Campus IT assisted me in documenting the doxing by collecting photos and tracking IP addresses, while security began doing additional patrols around my building and checking IDs of anyone who did not appear to be a student. The next day after the doxing incident, the university issued an official no trespass order against Mom, with Officer Grant personally driving out to deliver it to Mom at the farmhouse and warning her that any appearance on campus would result in immediate arrest and criminal trespass charges. 2 days later, I discovered a little parcel crammed in my mailbox among bills and school flyers. Inside was a thumb drive with a sticky note in Daniel's handwriting that simply stated proof. I connected it to my laptop and found scanned copies of all 4 of our birth certificates. My hands began to shake as I saw what Mom had written on each one. She had put our allotted roles in exquisite cursive handwriting right in the official medical condition boxes. Clara said, "Smart one, exceptional cognitive function." Mia said, "Pretty one, aesthetic priority." Daniel said, "Strong one, physical dominance required." Mine said, "Dumb one, severely limited capacity." She literally labeled our legal documents as if they were real medical diagnoses. I printed copies and dashed to Rachel's office without even retrieving my coat. Her cheeks turned white as she examined the birth certificates. "This is premeditated abuse documented from birth," she told me. "I've never seen anything this clear in 20 years of practice." She immediately began making copies for our case file, saying it will be the focal point of our permanent restraining order hearing. That same day my phone vibrated with a text from Mia using our old code. When I translated that, my stomach fell. She had passed out at the farmhouse, and her mother had to rush her to the emergency room. The doctor there observed she was terribly underweight and inquired about her eating habits. Mom explained that Mia was only anxious since her troublesome sister had abandoned the home and was making false charges. Mia stated that the doctor appeared suspicious, but she did not pursue the matter because Mom was present at all times. I contacted Mia back and asked if she could get copies of the medical documents. She was terrified, but she promised to try because Mom's condition was deteriorating by the day. Mom made her weigh herself 3 times a day, and cut her food portions even smaller. The following morning, Detective Quinn called with unexpected news. A neighbor near the farmhouse had seen news coverage of the probe and alerted the police. This woman claimed she had heard odd screaming from our house for years and seen medical supply trucks making deliveries far too frequently for a regular family. She'd always questioned what was going on, but Mom had explained that we were homeschooling special needs children who needed ongoing medical care. Quinn was adding the neighbor's statement to the accumulating body of evidence against Mom. Rachel felt it was time to go after Dr. Whitaker too. She filed an official complaint with the state medical board over his role in Mom's lobotomy threats. Even if he hadn't done anything yet, simply planning such a treatment on a healthy individual would violate every medical ethics standard in existence. The medical board announced that they will conduct an investigation and subpoena his patient data. 3 days later, Rachel called to deliver dismal news. Mom had petitioned for emergency guardianship over me, alleging that I was gravely handicapped and a danger to myself without regular care. The court has scheduled an evaluation for the following week. Rachel pushed hard to get them to agree to utilize an impartial assessor instead of Mom's preferred doctor. Daniel dropping off that thumb drive is like discovering the villain's diary with the wicked scheme written on the cover. Mom genuinely designated her children's birth certificates like grocery shop vegetables. She advised me on what to expect and told me to just be myself and respond honestly. The evaluation was conducted in a small office within the courthouse. The assessor was a woman in her 50s who appeared nice but thorough. I spent 3 hours answering questions, taking basic cognitive tests, explaining my educational background, and discussing the abuse. She asked me to complete math problems, read and explain texts, and demonstrate my understanding of abstract topics. She appeared startled when I handed her my GED certificate and college admission letter. "Your mother claims you have the mental capacity of a young child," she explained cautiously. I handed her the birth certificate in Mom's handwriting, which identified me as the dumb one from birth. The evaluator took thorough notes and stated that she needed time to study all of the information before presenting her recommendation to the court. Meanwhile, Amelia had been striving to obtain me mental health help. She linked me with a weekly on-campus support group for survivors of family abuse. There was a long waiting list for individual therapy, but the group gave me a place to talk to people who understood. The first meeting was difficult, but hearing other people's tales helped me feel less alone and weird. One woman had fled a similar predicament in which her parents assigned her the position of family failure. That night, Daniel sent me a text that made me cry. He'd visited a clinic and had x-rays taken of his joints. The pictures revealed extensive damage from being forced to lift high weights since he was 6 years old. His knees, shoulders and spine all revealed evidence of repetitive stress injuries, indicating that surgery will be required at some point. He described witnessing the physical damage in black and white as breaking through years of Mom's indoctrination. He was finally enraged at what she had done to his body in the name of making him stronger. He considered providing a statement to the police, but he was still concerned about what might happen to Clara if he turned entirely on Mom. Detective Quinn contacted me 2 days later about obtaining a search warrant for Dr. Whitaker's office. She emphasized that the procedure was progressing slowly because he had not done anything wrong yet. Being threatened as a tool for Mom's objectives was insufficient for most judges to issue a warrant. She required additional evidence of actual intent or preparation for the surgery that Mom had threatened. I understood but was irritated that we couldn't simply stop him before something awful happened. The entire legal system appeared to be intended to wait until after crimes had occurred rather than to prevent them. That same afternoon, I returned to my hostel after meeting with Rachel and discovered something strange. A folded piece of paper was placed under my door while I was away. My hands shook as I opened it and read the words written in a familiar handwriting. "Dumb girls who run away get hurt," was all it stated. But I knew Mom's method of writing letters. I called campus security right away, and Officer Grant arrived to take the note as evidence. Security spent hours studying the hallway's camera footage, but whoever departed had avoided all of them. They knew exactly where the blind spots were, so they had been watching and planning. Grant enhanced patrols near my building and suggested that I change my route to class. The next morning when I picked up my backpack for class, it seemed heavier than normal. I couldn't figure out why because I hadn't purchased any new books or supplies. I put everything on my bed and began inspecting all of the pockets and compartments. That's when I noticed it sewed inside the lining at the bottom. Someone had cut up the fabric, put a small GPS tracker, and then sewed it back together. The stitching was clean and nearly undetectable, but I could feel the hard plastic gadget inside. Detective Quinn arrived to retrieve it and stated that she would have it checked for fingerprints. She added stalking charges to the expanding list of offenses we were filing against Mom. The tracker appeared to be pricey, and it had likely been transmitting my location for several days. Later that week, I received encouraging news from the registrar's office. The institution agreed to allow me re-enroll provisionally for 2 classes until the legal issues were resolved. It wasn't the entire course load I desired, but having a regular pattern made me feel more grounded. Taking Introduction to Psychology and English Composition demonstrated that I was competent of college work. Amelia addressed my predicament to my instructors confidentially, and they were understanding. They provided assignment extensions when I had court dates or police meetings. However, juggling coursework and other responsibilities suddenly proved stressful. Some days, I'd go directly from a police interrogation to class, and then a meeting with Rachel. My mind was pushed in too many places, and I struggled to concentrate on my homework. The support group helped me manage my stress, but I still felt like I was drowning at times. 3 weeks after the evaluation, we finally received a decision on Mom's emergency guardianship petition. The evaluator's report said unequivocally that I was completely competent. The court refused Mom's petition and seemed genuinely concerned about the evidence we submitted. He scheduled a full hearing for a permanent restraining order and directed Detective Quinn to continue investigating. According to what my siblings told me, Mom did not take the denial well. That night, Clara used our secret code to send me a worried text. Mom had threatened Clara that if she testified against her, she would ruin her hands, rendering her unable to write or type ever again. Clara considered fleeing, but she had no idea where she would go, or how she would survive alone. She was never allowed to work or develop fundamental life skills. I quickly informed Rachel and Detective Quinn of the threat to Clara. They connected us with Marisol Vega, a social worker who specialized in assisting abuse victims to flee discreetly. Marisol began working with my siblings to organize safe getaways once they were ready. She provided them with information on shelters and transit resources via coded messaging. The difficult part was overcoming years of psychological control that made them scared to leave, as if Mom had convinced them they couldn't live without her, even as she devastated them. 2 days later, I received a call that made me cry with both relief and fear. Mia had eventually escaped to a women's shelter after Mom realized she was secretly communicating with me. Mom discovered Mia's secret phone and began yelling about treason and ecological destruction. Mia grabbed a bag of clothing and dashed out as Mom was trashing the phone. She called me from the shelter, crying but sounding relieved for the first time in years. She stated that she could no longer bear the forced starvation and had finally decided to prioritize her life over Mom's approval. The shelter was keeping her whereabouts a secret while also assisting her in receiving medical treatment for the effects of years of hunger. Within hours, Mom had contacted the police to report Mia as a kidnapped runaway. She said I had indoctrinated Mia and forced her to leave the house against her will. Detective Quinn swiftly confirmed with the shelter that Mia was an adult who freely departed. The fake report added to Mom's ongoing habit of harassment and control. Quinn claimed that every lie Mom told the authorities just strengthened our case. Mom was ruining her own reputation by making these desperate attempts to reclaim control. Meanwhile, Mia was finally able to eat regular meals without someone watching every bite. She told me that the shelter officials were surprised by how thin she was for her height. They sent her to experts who specialize in helping people recover from eating disorders. Mia admitted it felt strange to eat without guilt, but she was determined to get healthy. She wanted to be strong enough to speak up about what Mom had done to all of us. Rachel began putting together a civil harassment claim the next morning based on everything Mom had been doing online, pulling up screenshots of posts claiming I was mentally ill and dangerous, documenting every fake account she'd created to spread lies about me, and tracking down the original doxing post with my dorm address. She spread papers across her desk, demonstrating how Mom had written on parent sites that I was a runaway with significant brain injury who needed to be taken home for medical treatment. She made bogus missing person flyers using my photo, claiming I had the mental capacity of a 5-year-old. She even created a website called Help Bring Maya Home, which had fabricated details concerning my alleged problems. Rachel stated that having both criminal and civil cases would provide many options for stopping Mom's behavior, as different courts may issue different types of orders with varying consequences. While she worked on that, Dr. Sato called with the hair analysis results, and I could hear the shock in her voice as she explained that the test revealed I'd been exposed to sedatives on a regular basis for at least 4 years, with levels that suggested someone had purposefully drugged me, rather than providing me with proper medical care. The concentration patterns in different sections of my hair formed a timeline indicating that the drugging began around the time I turned 14 and continued until I escaped to college, with the highest levels occurring within the last year, when Mom must have increased the doses to keep me confused as I grew older. Dr. Sato stated that she had never seen anything like it outside of criminal poisoning cases and was writing a detailed report that would considerably bolster any criminal accusations brought. That same afternoon, a letter arrived from Dr. Whitaker's office, claiming that there was no record of any planned procedures for me, and denying any discussions with my mother about medical interventions. But Rachel observed the cautious wording, which avoided indicating he had never discussed it with Mom at all. How did Mia know exactly when to grab her belongings and flee while Mom was busy breaking the phone? The time felt ideal, as if she had been plotting her departure for centuries. The letter repeatedly used language such as no formal consultations and no scheduled appointments. That sounded more like legal protection than honest denial. It also highlighted their office's commitment to appropriate medical ethics 3 times, which Rachel believed demonstrated a sense of guilt. Detective Quinn devised a plan to obtain additional evidence and had me phone Dr. Whitaker's office while she taped everything, instructing me to ask generic questions about whether they ever made house calls or private treatments. Dr. Whitaker called, and while he didn't admit anything specific about me, he did mention that his practice occasionally handled difficult cases requiring discretion and private procedures for families with special circumstances, which Quinn said was reason enough to investigate his medical license and subpoena his records. Daniel contacted me 2 days later, crying, because he'd torn something in his knee during one of Mom's forced training sessions, in which she made him carry 200 pounds up and down stairs for 3 hours straight. The doctor at urgent care stated he required surgery and would be on crutches for at least 2 months, which meant he couldn't perform the crazy strength exercises Mom insisted on anymore. He informed me that the injury was almost a relief since it provided him a reason to stop being Mom's enforcer. While he pondered out how to get away, I could hear the pain in his voice, which was caused by both a physical injury and years of joint deterioration. Marisol had been working with him to arrange transportation to a men's shelter whenever he was ready to leave. Devising a complete escape plan with a volunteer who would pick him up during one of his physical therapy appointments, so Mom wouldn't notice he was gone until hours later. But Daniel kept hesitating because he was afraid of what Mom would do to Clara if he and Mia left, stating he couldn't leave our sister to face Mom's fury alone, even if remaining was ruining his body. He had been the enforcer for so long that the guilt of leaving Clara alone was eating him alive. Marisol had to constantly reminding him that if Mom ruined his ability to walk, he couldn't defend anyone. A week later, while I was headed to class, I observed someone in a large coat and sunglasses following me across campus. And, despite the disguise of a wig and other clothes, I recognized Mom's gait quickly after years of observing her mood shifts. I texted Officer Grant right away and continued going toward the campus security office as Mom approached, reaching into her purse for something I couldn't see. Grant apprehended her just outside the library, and when Mom tried to explain that she was only a concerned parent checking on her daughter, Grant reminded her of the no trespass order and called for backup. After years of Mom having complete control over every part of our life, it felt surreal to see Grant place handcuffs on her while she yelled about her parental rights. Mom was charged with criminal trespass and breaking a restraining order, and the prosecutor stated that this arrest would greatly help our case because it demonstrated Mom's inability to respect legal boundaries. 3 weeks later, at the permanent restraining order hearing, a neighbor near the farmhouse testified that she heard shouting at all hours and saw medical supply trucks making deliveries that looked excessive for a regular family. She remembered discovering me once when I was 15, stumbling around bewildered in her yard because the drugs Mom gave me had made me dizzy and I'd gotten lost, and how Mom had hauled me home, claiming I was gravely impaired and prone to wandering. Combined with all of our other evidence, including the birth certificates with our allocated responsibilities, the drugging proof, and Mom's serial infractions, the judge appeared increasingly worried as the case progressed. The judge issued a 3-year restraining order with such tight conditions that Mom could not contact us directly or through third parties, could not come within 500 feet of us, and could not write about us online. Mom's counsel claimed that it was excessive for a mother attempting to help her children, but the judge determined that the pattern of abuse and recent offenses indicated a significant ongoing threat that warranted maximal protection. Within days, Mom filed a defamation case, saying I was lying about everything and damaging her reputation with bogus charges of abuse, seeking emotional distress damages, and demanding I publicly renounce my delusions about being drugged and controlled. Rachel simply smiled when she received the case and quickly began preparing an anti-slap motion to have it dismissed, saying that this type of reprisal was frequent among abusers attempting to quiet their victims through legal intimidation. 2 weeks later, the courtroom was packed when the judge ruled on Rachel's anti-slap motion, and I saw Mom's face get crimson as he stated that her case was plainly intended to keep me from testifying about my own abuse experiences. The judge ordered her to pay all of my legal bills within 30 days and warned that any future litigation would be considered harassment, despite Mom's lawyer's attempts to argue that this was about safeguarding a mother's reputation. But the judge didn't buy it at all. Detective Quinn called me that afternoon to say she had finally received approval for the search warrant based on everything we had provided her, as well as the neighbor's testimony and additional evidence from other families who had dealt with Dr. Whitaker. She informed me that they would be investigating the farmhouse the next morning for medical supplies, drugs that had not been prescribed to anyone, and any documentation of Mom's ecosystem system, and asked if there was anything in particular they should look for. I told her about Mom's filing cabinet in her bedroom, where she maintained all of our growth charts, charting how well we performed in our assigned duties, and the locked box under her bed where she kept the medicines she forced me take. The search team discovered far more than I expected, including detailed notebooks dating back to our births in which Mom recorded daily observations about how to keep us in our roles, bottles of prescription sedatives with no patient names, and 17 different tracking devices she had planned to use on us. They also discovered written emails between Mom and Dr. Whitaker detailing cognitive correction techniques for troublesome children, as well as receipts for medical equipment with no legitimate use in an ordinary family. Detective Quinn subsequently showed me images of the evidence room, which made my stomach turn. Seeing everything put out on tables with evidence tags, especially the syringes and vials Mom had been collecting for whatever she was plotting next. Mom was arrested at her motel within hours of the search for assault, stalking and child endangerment based on the evidence discovered. Detective Quinn also stated that Dr. Whitaker was under investigation when it was determined that he had performed these specific operations on other families as well. Mom's mugshot showed her still attempting to appear composed, but you could see the wrath in her eyes as her perfect system was finally revealed to the public. The next day, Daniel was called in for questioning about his role in bringing me back from college, and I felt horrible thinking he could be in trouble for something Mom forced him to do. The detective who interviewed him called me later to say they weren't bringing charges because it was evident Daniel was also a victim who had been threatened and manipulated, which appeared to help him finally recognize that what Mom did to all of us was abuse. Mia went to the police station that week to give a sworn testimony regarding the diet pills and forced starvation, bringing photos of her at her thinnest and medical documents from many fainting episodes that Mom had disregarded. Calera submitted a written testimony that included images of her burned paintings and extensive explanations of the penalties she received for displaying any artistic talent, as well as witness testimonials from 2 former neighbors who saw the smoke from Mom's work. Their courage in stepping out bolstered the case, and the prosecution stated that having all 4 siblings confirm the abuse pattern made it nearly impossible for Mom to argue this was simply one unhappy child making things up. Mom posted bail 3 days later and began showing up at the courthouse throughout my hearings for the restraining order appeals, standing exactly 5,001 feet away, which was technically outside the order but clearly intended to intimidate me. Each time she arrived, campus security or court authorities took photos and measurements, adding to the proof that she could not respect limits, even when facing serious criminal accusations. The trauma began to strike me hard after the immediate threat had passed, and I found myself jumping anytime someone walked behind me, or unable to sleep because every sound made me believe Mom had discovered a way around the restraining order. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. I was in complete terror, convinced that I had heard her voice or smelt the medicine from the pills she forced down my throat, despite the fact that I knew she couldn't come near me. Amelia assisted me in getting on the waiting list for trauma therapy through the university counseling facility, but they stated it could take weeks before a seat became available due to the high demand. She also linked me with an online support group for family violence survivors, which was beneficial, knowing that others understood what it was like to be terrified of your own mother. Prosecutor Julianne Price arranged a conference with me and Rachel to discuss a plea deal he was considering for Mom, in which she would plead guilty to assault and stalking in exchange for the more serious charges being dropped. He said that trials are extremely difficult for victims because they require them to testify and relive everything in detail, and that this agreement ensured she would receive probation with forced mental therapy, as well as a long-term no-contact order with all of us. Finding medical supply trucks making regular deliveries to an ordinary residence makes me wonder how many people sensed anything amiss but never inquired about what was going on inside that farmhouse. The stipulations included 3 years of probation, with any violation resulting in immediate jail time, twice weekly forced therapy that she would have to pay for herself, and a 10-year restraining order that covered all 4 of us kids with no exceptions for holidays or family activities. I contacted my siblings that night, and we discussed for hours about whether to support the plea deal, with Daniel saying he simply wanted it to be finished, Mia fearing Mom would find a way around any limits, and Calera hoping the treatment would truly help Mom recognize what she had done to us. We eventually agreed that our safety was more important than seeing Mom receive the maximum sentence, and that having a predetermined outcome was preferable to risking a trial where anything could go wrong. 2 days later, we all signed letters to the prosecutor expressing our support for the plea offer, and Mom pleaded guilty in court to assault and stalking, while the judge ensured she understood she was agreeing to stay away from all of us for a decade. Detective Quinn informed me that after our story reached the local news, 3 other families had contacted the medical board regarding Dr. Whitaker offering unusual therapies for their children that were not standard medical procedures. The board immediately suspended his license while they examined everything, and Quinn stated that he would most likely never practice medicine again, which meant Mom had lost her major medical person, who would have done the horrific things she threatened. Mia texted me a week later, saying she'd found a little apartment just 2 blocks from university with money our grandmother had left us that Mom had no idea about, and she was finally eating actual meals after years of starvation. She said her body was gradually learning what normal felt like, and she'd joined the waiting list for eating disorder therapy at the Student Health Center, even though it could take months to get in. Daniel texted me that he had begun physical therapy for the damage to his joints caused by being forced to lift weights since he was 6 years old, and that the therapist was astounded by how terrible things were. He also stated that he had joined a support group for men who had been abused, and that he was sorry for assisting Mom that day in my dorm room, even though he realized I probably couldn't forgive him just yet. I admired his efforts to make things right, even if I wasn't ready to totally trust him again after what had transpired. Clara contacted me one afternoon to tell she had acquired a job at an art supply store downtown and had resumed painting in the back room during her breaks, where no one could see her. She wasn't ready to show anyone her work yet because Mom's burning of her paintings haunted her, but just holding a brush made her feel more like herself. After weeks of paperwork and meetings, the financial aid office finally finalized my dependence override, proving Mom no longer had influence over my education. They reinstated my whole financial aid package and placed permanent blocks on all of my records, ensuring that Mom would never have access to them again, allowing me to register for full-time school next semester without fear of her interference. My siblings and I began texting each other using a combination of our old secret language from childhood and normal discourse, because we all needed to keep connected while also acknowledging that we were all suffering with trauma in various ways. Mia was concentrating on her physical recuperation, Clara on her artistic side, and Daniel was dealing with his remorse over being Mom's enforcer all these years. I was finally taken off the waiting list for treatment and met with a counselor who specialized in family trauma and control issues. She listened to my entire experience without passing judgment and informed me that what Mom did was severe psychological and physical abuse, not just rigorous parenting as she always claimed. That night, after therapy, I slept the entire night for the first time since escaping. No nightmares about Mom finding me or waking up in terror believing I heard her voice. The prosecutor called to tell me that during Mom's first probation check-in, the officer had to caution her because she had attempted to reach us through a cousin who had called Mia, wondering why we were so nasty to our mother. The probation officer logged the infraction and informed Mom that any further efforts would result in instant jail time, making me feel like the system was genuinely protecting us for once. Mia, Clara and I decided to meet for coffee at a little shop near college, marking the first time the 3 of us had been together without Mom directing every word and movement. We were all injured in different ways, with Mia remaining too thin, Clara's hands shaking slightly, and me continually looking over my shoulder, but we were learning what it meant to simply exist as ourselves. Mia ordered an entire lunch without calculating calories, Clara doodled on napkins, and I discussed my classes without pretending to be foolish. We spent 3 hours being normal sisters for the first time in our lives, with no roles to perform or penalties to dread. Walking to my morning English lesson the next week, I realized I wasn't looking behind me every few feet or calculating escape routes in case Mom came up. The sun felt nice on my face, as other students rushed past me to get to their classes, leaving me as just another college student on his way to learn something new. I sat in the front row and raised my hand to answer a question about the reading, unconcerned that being smart would get me hurt. When I finished my answer, the professor grinned and stated I had made an outstanding point, which would have gotten me a beating at home, but here it simply meant I understood the material. After class, I walked to the library to study for my psychology exam, without hunching my shoulders or shuffling my feet to appear less adept. Other students were studying around me, and I took out my textbooks and highlighters as if everything was normal, as if I belonged here just as much as everyone else. The stupid one was attending college classes and developing acquaintances who knew me simply as Maya, not as someone allocated to a sick family ecosystem. I had a future that Mom said I couldn't have. Even though we all had a long way to go in our healing, we were now free to be who we truly were, rather than who she decided we needed to be.